Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the crisp Alaskan air bit at my cheeks as I adjusted my backpack straps. Ahead of me, Sarah was practically bouncing with excitement, her blonde ponytail swishing back and forth as she walked. Mike trudged along beside her, his camera already out and snapping photos of the lush Tongass National Forest surrounding us. "Come on, slowpoke," Sarah called back to me, her grin infectious. "We've got miles to cover before nightfall." I quickened my pace, trying to ignore the knot of unease forming in my stomach. Something about the forest felt off today, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The trees seemed to loom larger than usual, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. "You okay back there, Alex?" Mike asked, lowering his camera and giving me a concerned look. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just taking in the scenery. It's different today, isn't it?" Mike glanced around, frowning slightly. "I guess. The light does seem a bit strange. Probably just some weather rolling in." As if on cue, a gust of wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a faint, acrid scent that made me wrinkle my nose. Sarah, ever the optimist, took a deep breath and spread her arms wide. "Smell that fresh air," she exclaimed. "This is why I love hiking. You just don't get this in the city." I nodded, not wanting to dampen her enthusiasm with my growing sense of dread. We continued on, the forest growing denser as we ventured deeper into its heart. The sunlight filtering through the canopy took on a greenish tinge, casting eerie shadows across the forest floor. About an hour into our hike, I noticed wisps of mist beginning to curl around our ankles. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a light haze that seemed to cling to the ground. But with each step, it grew thicker, rising steadily until it reached our knees. Guys?" I called out, my voice sounding muffled in the heavy air. "Maybe we should turn back. This fog is getting pretty intense." Sarah turned, her face a pale oval in the thickening mist. "Don't be such a worrywart, Alex. It's just a little fog. Adds to the atmosphere, don't you think?" Before I could respond, Mike let out a low whistle. "Check this out," he said, pointing his camera at the mist. "It's moving in really weird patterns, almost like it's alive." I peered at his camera screen, my blood running cold, as I watched the mist swirl and eddy in unnatural ways. It seemed to be forming shapes, faces, hands, creatures I couldn't quite make out, before dissolving back into formless vapor. "Okay, that's creepy," Sarah admitted, her earlier bravado faltering. "Maybe Alex is right, we should head back." We turned to retrace our steps, but the mist had grown so thick that I could barely see a few feet in front of me. The trees loomed like dark sentinels in the gloom, their outlines blurred and distorted. "Stay close," I called out, reaching for Sarah's hand. "We don't want to get separated in this." I felt her fingers brush against mine, then slip away as another gust of wind howled through the forest. The mist swirled violently, and suddenly I couldn't see Sarah or Mike at all. "Sarah? Mike?" I shouted, my heart pounding in my chest. "Where are you guys?" Their voices came back to me, muffled and distant, as if they were much farther away than they should have been. "Alex? I can't see you." Sarah's voice was tinged with panic. "The mist, it's so thick." "Just stay where you are," I called back, trying to move in the direction of her voice. "I'll come to you." I took a few tentative steps forward, my hands outstretched, feeling my way through the soupy fog. The forest had gone eerily silent, the only sound my own ragged breathing and the soft squelch of my boots in the damp earth. Suddenly, Sarah's scream pierced the air, high and terrified. "Something's got me! Alex, help!" I lunged forward, my heart in my throat. "Sarah, I'm coming!" But as I reached the spot where I thought she should be, my hands met only empty air. The mist swirled around me, almost mockingly, and Sarah's scream cut off abruptly. "Sarah!" I yelled, spinning around frantically. "Mike!" Can you hear me? Only silence answered. The mist pressed in closer, so thick now that I could barely see my own hands in front of my face. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized I was completely alone in this unnatural fog. I stumbled forward, no longer sure which direction I was going. The trees seemed to shift and move in my peripheral vision, and more than once I could have sworn I saw dark shapes flitting through the mist just out of reach. This isn't happening, I muttered to myself, trying to keep the hysteria at bay. It's just fog. They have to be here somewhere. But deep down, I knew this was no ordinary mist. The way it moved, the way it seemed to be hurting me, there was an intelligence behind it, a malevolence that made my skin crawl. I don't know how long I wandered, calling out for my friends until my voice was hoarse. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the swirling white void. My clothes were soaked through, and a bone-deep chill had set in, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was finding Sarah and Mike. Just when I was about to collapse from exhaustion, the mist suddenly thinned. I found myself stumbling into a small clearing, the trees forming a perfect circle around its edge. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Maybe this was where my friends had ended up too. "Sarah? Mike?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Are you here?" But as the last wisps of mist cleared, I saw that the clearing was empty. No sign of my friends. No sign that anyone had ever been here before. Just me, alone, surrounded by the looming dark of the forest. I sank to my knees, the damp earth soaking through my jeans. The reality of the situation crashed over me like a wave. My friends were gone, swallowed up by that impossible mist. And I was lost, alone in a forest that suddenly seemed vast and alien and hungry. As if sensing my despair, the mist began to creep back into the clearing, tendrils of white vapor curling around the edges like grasping fingers. I scrambled to my feet, backing away until I hit the trunk of a massive spruce tree. "What are you?" I whispered, watching the mist advance. "What have you done with my friends?" The mist didn't answer, of course. But as it closed in around me once more, I could have sworn I heard whispers on the wind. Familiar voices calling my name, pleading for help. Sarah's laugh, distorted and wrong. Mike's voice, telling me to join them. I pressed my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. "This isn't real," I told myself fiercely. "It's just the mist playing tricks on you. You have to keep it together, Alex, for Sarah and Mike. You have to find them." But as the mist enveloped me once more, cutting off all sight and sound of the world beyond its white veil, a small, traitorous part of my mind wondered if I would ever see my friends again, or if I, too, would simply vanish into the hungry fog, another victim of whatever malevolent force had descended upon the Tongass National Forest. The mist swirled around me, and I was alone in the darkness once more, with only the fading echoes of my friends' voices to keep me company in this nightmare that had so suddenly become my reality. The mist clung to me like a second skin, cold and damp as I stumbled through the endless expanse of trees. My voice was hoarse from shouting, but I couldn't stop. I had to find them. "Sarah, Mike," I called out for what felt like the 1,000th time. "Can anyone hear me?" My words echoed back to me, distorted and mocking. Sarah, Mike. The forest seemed to be playing with me, twisting my own voice into something alien and sinister. I paused, leaning against a massive spruce tree to catch my breath. The bark was slick with moisture, and I could feel it seeping through my jacket. How long had I been wandering? Hours? Days? Time had lost all meaning in this eternal twilight. As I stood there, trying to gather my thoughts, a flicker of movement caught my eye. A shadow, darker than the surrounding mist, darted between two trees about 20 yards away. My heart leaped into my throat. "Hello?" I called out, pushing away from the tree. "Sarah? Mike, is that you?" The shadow paused, seeming to turn towards me. For a moment I could almost make out a human silhouette. Then it was moving again, gliding away into the mist. Without thinking, I gave chase. "Wait!" I yelled, crashing through the underbrush. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging scratches, but I barely noticed. All that mattered was catching up to that shadow, that promise of human contact in this nightmare realm. I ran until my lungs burned, always keeping that flitting shape just at the edge of my vision. It led me deeper into the forest, to areas where the trees grew so close together their branches intertwined overhead, blocking out what little light remained. Suddenly, the shadow vanished. I skidded to a stop, panting heavily, my eyes darting around for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just more trees, more mist. "No," I muttered, spinning in a circle. "No, no, no, come back." As I turned, my foot caught on something soft lying on the forest floor. I stumbled, nearly falling, and looked down to see what had tripped me. My blood ran cold. It was Mike's backpack. With trembling hands, I knelt and picked it up. The fabric was torn, great rents running through it as if it had been clawed by some massive beast. The contents were strewn about: a crushed water bottle, a torn map, a handful of granola bars, but no sign of Mike himself. "Oh God," I whispered, clutching the ruined backpack to my chest. "What happened to you?" As if in answer, the mist around me seemed to thicken, swirling in unnatural patterns. And then, impossibly, I heard it whisper, "Alex." I jumped to my feet, dropping the backpack. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Alex, help us." The voice, or was it voices, seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It sounded like Sarah and Mike, but wrong somehow, distorted as if they were speaking underwater. "Where are you?" I shouted, spinning around wildly. "Tell me how to find you." "Join us, Alex," the mist whispered. "Become one with us." I pressed my hands to my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. "This isn't real," I told myself fiercely. "You're hallucinating. The isolation, the fear, it's making you hear things." But even with my ears covered, the whispers continued, seeping into my mind like poison. "You're alone, Alex. Always alone. But we can change that. Join us in the mist." "Shut up," I screamed, my eyes flying open. "You're not real. You're not my friends." I started running again, no destination in mind, just a desperate need to get away from those maddening whispers. Branches tore at my clothes. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me, but I kept going. I ran until my legs gave out and I collapsed to the damp forest floor, gasping for breath. As I lay there, trying to slow my racing heart, a faint glow caught my attention. At first I thought it was just my imagination, another trick of this cursed forest. But as I raised my head, I saw it clearly. A series of strange symbols carved into the trunk of a nearby tree, emitting a soft, pulsing light. Slowly, cautiously, I got to my feet and approached the tree. The symbols were like nothing I'd ever seen before. Not quite letters, not quite pictographs. They seemed to shift and change as I looked at them, rearranging themselves in patterns that hurt my eyes to follow. "What are you?" I murmured, reaching out to touch one of the glowing marks. As my fingertips brushed the rough bark, a jolt of energy shot through me. Images flashed through my mind, glimpses of another world, a place of twisted geometry and impossible colors. I saw Sarah and Mike, their faces contorted in silent screams as they were pulled into a swirling vortex of mist. And I saw something else, something vast and ancient and hungry, reaching out across the dimensions. I jerked my hand back with a gasp, stumbling away from the tree. The visions faded, leaving me shaken and disoriented. But as the shock wore off, I realized something had changed. The oppressive silence of the forest was gone, replaced by a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to emanate from the glowing symbols. And I could hear voices again, real voices this time, not the maddening whispers of the mist. They were faint and distant, but undeniably human. "Hello?" I called out, hope surging in my chest. "Is someone there?" "Help us," came the faint reply. "Trapped." It was Sarah's voice, I was sure of it. And it was coming from inside the tree? No, Not inside. Beyond it somehow. I turned back to the glowing symbols, my mind racing. Those visions I'd seen when I touched the tree, they weren't hallucinations, they were real. The mist, the disappearances, the whispers, it was all connected to whatever lay on the other side of those symbols. "Sarah!" I shouted, pressing my hands against the tree trunk. "Mike, can you hear me? Where are you?" Other side. Mike's voice this time, barely audible. "Portal. Careful. Portal." The word sent a chill down my spine. Somehow my friends had been transported to another world, another dimension, and these symbols were the key to reaching them. But as I stood there trying to make sense of it all, I became aware of movement in the mist behind me. The shadows were gathering again, darker and more numerous than before, and they were closing in. I spun around, pressing my back against the tree with its glowing symbols. The shadows writhed and twisted, taking on vaguely humanoid shapes. I could hear whispers again, but they weren't pretending to be my friends anymore. They were hungry, angry, alien. "Stay back," I yelled, though I knew it was useless. These things, whatever they were, weren't going to be deterred by words. As the shadow creatures crept closer, the humming from the tree grew louder. The symbols pulsed brighter, their light cutting through the mist. I could feel heat building behind me, the bark of the tree growing warm against my back. I had a choice to make, and only seconds to make it. I could stay here and face whatever horrors the mist had conjured, or I could take a leap of faith into the unknown, following the path that had swallowed my friends. The shadow creatures were only feet away now, their formless arms reaching for me. I could smell rot and decay, feel the cold emptiness of their touch. "I'm coming, guys," I whispered, hoping Sarah and Mike could somehow hear me. Then I turned and pressed my palms flat against the glowing symbols. The world exploded into light and sound. I felt myself being stretched, pulled, torn apart, and reassembled. The forest vanished, replaced by a kaleidoscope of impossible colors and shapes. As I fell through the portal, leaving my world behind, one thought echoed through my mind. I really hope I haven't just made a terrible mistake. The last thing I heard before consciousness slipped away was the enraged howl of the shadow creatures, furious that their prey had escaped. Then there was nothing but the rush of interdimensional travel, carrying me towards whatever fate awaited on the other side. The world spun around me in a nauseating blur of color and sound. I felt as if I was being pulled apart at the molecular level, stretched across an infinite expanse, then slammed back together in an instant. When the spinning finally stopped, I found myself on my hands and knees, retching onto unfamiliar ground. As I gasped for breath trying to regain my bearings, I realized the air itself felt wrong. It was thick and heavy, with an acrid taste that burned my throat. Slowly I raised my head, blinking away the tears that had formed in my eyes. The sight that greeted me was beyond anything I could have imagined. Gone was the misty forest of the Tongass. In its place stretched a landscape that defied comprehension. The sky above, if you could call it a sky, was a swirling vortex of purple and green, punctuated by flashes of what looked like lightning, but moved in slow motion. The ground beneath me pulsated with a sickly orange glow, its surface rippling like disturbed water. In the distance, I could see structures that might have been buildings, but they twisted and bent in ways that hurt my eyes to look at. Shapes that could have been trees dotted the landscape, but they were wrong. Their leaves writhed and reached out like tentacles, and their trunks seemed to breathe. "What the hell?" I muttered, slowly getting to my feet. My legs felt weak and shaky as if I'd just run a marathon. A sound caught my attention, something between a howl and a scream, but with a musical quality that sent shivers down my spine. I spun around, searching for the source, and that's when I saw her. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice cracking. She stood about 100 yards away, her back to me. Relief flooded through me at the sight of a familiar figure in this alien world. I started to run towards her, my feet slipping on the undulating ground. "Sarah, It's me, Alex. I found you. As I got closer, Sarah slowly turned to face me. The relief I'd felt moments ago curdled into horror. It was Sarah, but not Sarah. Her skin had taken on a translucent quality, shot through with pulsing veins of that same sickly orange that permeated the ground. Her eyes, once a warm brown, now glowed with an inner light that was decidedly inhuman. When she smiled at me, her teeth were sharp and too numerous. "Alex," she said, her voice a discordant chorus of tones. "You came. How wonderful." I skidded to a stop, my heart pounding. "Sarah, what happened to you?" She tilted her head at an impossible angle, regarding me with those glowing eyes. "Happened? I've been improved, Alex. This world, it changes you, makes you more. You'll see." I took a step back, shaking my head. "No, this isn't right. We need to get out of here. Where's Mike?" Sarah's smile widened, stretching her face in ways a human mouth shouldn't be able to move. "Mike is becoming just as I am, just as you will. Why fight it, Alex? It feels so good to let go." She reached out a hand towards me. Her fingers were too long, the joints bending in extra places. I scrambled backward, nearly losing my footing on the writhing ground. "Stay back," I yelled. "You're not Sarah. What are you?" The thing wearing Sarah's face laughed, a sound like breaking glass and singing birds all at once. "Oh, but I am Sarah. I'm just more. And soon you'll be more too. We'll all be together, part of something greater." As she spoke, I became aware of movement all around us. The alien trees were reaching out their tentacle-like branches. The ground itself seemed to be flowing towards me, trying to pull me in. And in the distance, I could see more figures approaching. Twisted, changed, but with hints of human features I recognized. Was one of them Mike? Panic overtook me. I turned and ran, not caring which direction, just needing to get away from the horror my friend had become. The landscape blurred around me as I sprinted, my feet slipping and sliding on the ever-moving ground. I could hear Sarah, or the thing that used to be Sarah, calling after me, her voice echoing strangely in this warped world. "You can't run forever, Alex. This world wants you. It needs you, just like it needed us." I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. Sarah was following, but not by running. Her body was stretching, elongating impossibly as she flowed across the ground like liquid. Behind her, I could see other figures moving in similarly impossible ways. "No, no, no," I panted, pushing myself to run faster. Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet began to shift more violently. It rippled and heaved, sending me stumbling. I fell hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. As I gasped for breath, I felt the ground start to pull at me, trying to drag me down into its pulsing orange depths. "No," I yelled, clawing at the surface, trying to pull myself free. But it was like quicksand, drawing me in deeper with every movement. As I sank, I could see Sarah approaching, her distorted form looming over me. "Don't fight it, Alex," she crooned. "Let it take you. Let yourself become." The ground was up to my chest now, its pulsing warmth seeping into my body. I could feel it trying to change me, to remake me in its image. With the last of my strength, I reached out, trying to find something, anything to hold on to. My hand brushed against something solid, a rock, or maybe a root from one of the alien trees. I gripped it tightly, using it to anchor myself. "I won't let go," I growled through gritted teeth. "I won't become like you." Sarah's warped face loomed closer, her glowing eyes boring into mine. "You don't have a choice, Alex. None of us did. This is evolution. This is transcendence." As she reached for me with those two long fingers, I squeezed my eyes shut, focusing all my will on one thought. This isn't real. I want to go back. I need to go back. The world seemed to lurch again. I felt that same sickening sensation of being pulled apart and put back together. There was a rush of wind, a cacophony of alien sounds, and then silence. I opened my eyes, blinking in confusion. The writhing orange ground was gone. The twisted sky had vanished. I was lying on my back on damp earth, surrounded once more by the towering trees of the Tongass National Forest. The mist swirled around me, thick and impenetrable as ever. For a long moment I just lay there, gasping for breath, my mind reeling. Had it all been a hallucination? Some kind of waking nightmare brought on by fear and isolation? But as I sat up, I noticed something clutched in my right hand. A small, smooth stone, glowing faintly with that same sickly orange light I'd seen in the other world. And my clothes were stained with a strange, iridescent substance that seemed to shift colors as I moved. "What's happening to me?" I whispered, staring at my shaking hands. The stone pulsed once, then went dark. In the distance, I thought I heard Sarah's distorted laugh, carried on the mist. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. I was back in the forest, yes, but I knew now that this mist was more than just water vapor. It was a veil between worlds, a barrier that was growing thinner by the moment. And somewhere out there, in this forest or beyond it, my friends were waiting. Changed, twisted, but still Sarah and Mike. I had to find a way to save them, to bring them back to our world. But first, I needed to understand what we were up against. As I set off once more into the mist-shrouded forest, clutching the strange stone like a lifeline, one thought kept repeating in my mind. Things were no longer just about survival. The forest seemed to close in around me as I stumbled through the mist, clutching the strange, faintly glowing stone I'd brought back from wherever I'd been. My mind reeled, trying to process what I'd seen, what had happened to Sarah. Was it real? Was any of this real? I leaned against a massive tree trunk, trying to catch my breath and gather my thoughts. As I did, I felt something odd about the bark under my hand. It was too smooth, too regular. I peered closer, brushing away clumps of moss and lichen. There, carved into the trunk, were the same kind of symbols I'd seen before, the ones that had sent me to that nightmarish other world. My heart raced as I traced them with my fingers, half expecting to be yanked away again. But nothing happened. "Okay," I muttered to myself. "Okay, think. These symbols are important. They're connected to whatever's happening here." As I examined the tree more closely, I noticed something else, a deep hollow near the base, almost hidden by gnarled roots. Curiosity overcoming my fear, I knelt down and reached inside. My fingers brushed against something that wasn't bark or dirt. It was leather, old and cracked. I pulled it out carefully, revealing a battered journal, its pages yellow with age. "What the hell?" I whispered, turning it over in my hands. The cover was unmarked, but as I opened it, a folded piece of paper fell out. I unfolded it with trembling fingers, revealing a handwritten note. "To whoever finds this, I'm sorry. I couldn't stop it. But maybe you can. The mist is hungry. It wants us all. Learn from my mistakes. Save them if you can. Dr. Eleanor Marsh, 1973. My blood ran cold. 1973? This had been happening for over 50 years? I started flipping through the journal, my eyes widening as I read Dr. Marsh's increasingly frantic entries. Day 1. The mist appeared suddenly, swallowing half our research team. We can hear them calling, but can't reach them. What is this phenomenon? Day 7. Johnson disappeared today. The symbols are the key. They opened something, a doorway perhaps. But to where? Day 15. I saw something in the mist today. Not human, not of this world. God help us all. As I read, pieces started falling into place. The mist, the symbols, the other world. It was all connected. Dr. Marsh and her team had stumbled upon something beyond our understanding and paid the price. I reached the final entry, dated nearly a month after the first. I know the truth now. The mist isn't just a weather phenomenon. It's a portal, a gateway between dimensions. And something on the other side is using it to invade our world. I've seen what it does to people, how it changes them. I'm the only one left. I have to warn others. I have to... The entry ended abruptly, a long ink streak marring the page as if Dr. Marsh had been suddenly interrupted. I closed the journal, my mind reeling. A portal to another dimension. It sounded insane, but after what I'd seen, what had happened to Sarah... Alex. I froze. That voice. It was Mike's, but wrong somehow, distorted and echoing strangely through the mist. Alex. Help me. I spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice. Went, Mike, where are you? So cold, Alex. I'm so alone. Come find me. The voice seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stumbled forward, journal clutched to my chest, peering desperately through the swirling mist. Keep talking, Mike. I'll find you. This way, Alex. Follow my voice. I pushed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face. The mist grew thicker, seeming to pulse with an inner light. And Mike's voice grew stranger, more inhuman with each call. Yes, closer. Join us. I skidded to a stop, my heart pounding. That wasn't Mike. Not anymore. Just like Sarah, he had been changed, twisted by whatever lay on the other side of the mist. No, I whispered, backing away. You're not Mike. Stay away from me. A sound like laughter echoed through the mist, but it was all wrong. Too high, too sharp, filled with too many tones to be human. Smart boy. The thing that wasn't Mike hissed. But you can't run forever. The mist will have you just like it had us. Just like it had dear Dr. Marsh. I turned and ran, crashing through the forest blindly. Branches tore at my clothes. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me, but I kept going. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Finally, I burst through a thick curtain of ferns and found myself facing a sheer rock face. And there, half hidden by hanging vines, was the dark mouth of a cave. I hesitated for just a moment, glancing back the way I'd come. The mist was roiling, shapes moving within it that I didn't want to examine too closely. But as I watched, I noticed something strange. The mist seemed to be avoiding the cave entrance. It swirled and eddied around it, but never quite touched it. Without further hesitation, I dove into the cave. The temperature dropped immediately, and the sounds of the forest faded away, replaced by the soft drip of water echoing off stone walls. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the cave. The beam reflected off wet stone, revealing a passage that led deeper into the earth. Okay, I muttered to myself, trying to steady my nerves. Okay, Alex, you're safe for now. Think. What do you know? I pulled out Dr. Marsh's journal, flipping through it again. The mist is a portal. It's changing people, like Sarah and Mike. And it's been happening for decades, maybe longer. As I moved deeper into the cave, my light fell on something that made me gasp. The cave walls were covered in paintings. Ancient, faded, but still clearly visible. And what they depicted chilled me to the bone. Humanoid figures, distorted and twisted like Sarah had been. Strange, tentacled creatures emerging from swirling vortexes. And everywhere those same symbols I'd seen carved into the trees. Oh my God, I breathed, running my fingers over the paintings. This has been happening for centuries. I noticed one painting in particular, a group of human figures standing before what looked like the mouth of a cave, holding up their hands to ward off a wall of mist. This cave, I realized, it's protected somehow. That's why the mist can't enter. As if in response to my words, I heard a faint humming sound. It seemed to be coming from deeper in the cave. Cautiously, I followed the sound, the beam of my flashlight revealing more paintings as I went. They told a story of an ancient people who had encountered beings from another world, of battles fought and rituals performed to keep the mist at bay. Finally, I emerged into a large chamber, and there, in the center, stood a stone altar. Carved into its surface were those same symbols I'd seen everywhere, glowing faintly with an inner light. I approached slowly, drawn by an inexplicable urge to touch the altar. As my fingers brushed the cool stone, the humming grew louder. The symbols pulsed brightly, and suddenly, my mind was filled with images. Flashes of knowledge and understanding flooding in faster than I could process. I saw the mist for what it truly was. A thin place between worlds, a barrier that had protected our reality for eons. I saw the beings on the other side, ancient and hungry, seeking a way in. And I saw how they could be stopped. As the vision faded, I found myself on my knees before the altar, gasping for breath. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. "I know what I have to do," I whispered, pushing myself to my feet. "I can stop this. I can save Sarah and Mike." But as I turned to leave the cave, a chill ran down my spine. Because there, blocking the entrance, was a wall of swirling mist. And in it, I could see shapes moving. Familiar shapes, calling my name in voices that were almost, but not quite, human. The final battle was about to begin. The cave's protective aura seemed to pulse around me as I gathered my thoughts and what little supplies I had left. The knowledge imparted by the altar swirled in my mind, a chaotic mix of ancient wisdom and cosmic horror. I knew what I had to do, but the prospect terrified me to my core. "Okay, Alex," I muttered to myself, dumping the contents of my backpack onto the cave floor. "Time to save the world. No pressure." I sorted through my meager possessions: a half-empty water bottle, some granola bars, a first aid kit, and my trusty Swiss Army knife. Not exactly the kit you'd expect for an interdimensional rescue mission, but it would have to do. The most important item, I knew, would be the symbols. I pulled out Dr. Marsh's journal and flipped through it, finding the clearest depictions of the strange alien glyphs. With shaking hands, I used my knife to carve them into a piece of bark I'd found near the cave entrance. As I worked, I couldn't help but think of Sarah and Mike. What horrors had they endured in that other world? Could I even save them, or were they already too far gone? "I'm coming for you guys," I whispered, my knife scraping against the bark. "Just hold on a little longer." Once the symbols were carved, I held up the bark, comparing it to the glowing altar. The resemblance was uncanny, and I felt a faint vibration in my hands as if the carved symbols were resonating with their stone counterparts. I packed everything back into my bag, including Dr. Marsh's journal. Something told me I'd need all the information I could get on the other side. Taking a deep breath, I approached the cave entrance. The mist swirled just beyond, thicker than ever. I could hear whispers in it now, voices that were almost familiar but twisted into something inhuman. "Alex, join us. Become..." I shook my head, trying to clear it. "Not today, thanks," I muttered. Holding the carved bark in front of me like a shield, I stepped to the very edge of the cave's protection. The mist recoiled slightly, as if repelled by the symbols I carried. "Here goes nothing," I said, and stepped into the mist. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. I felt my body being pulled apart at the molecular level, every atom screaming in protest. Colors I had no names for flashed before my eyes, and sounds that shouldn't exist assaulted my ears. I tried to scream, but I had no mouth. I tried to close my eyes, but I had no eyelids. I was everywhere and nowhere, stretched across an infinity of impossible spaces. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. I found myself on my hands and knees, retching onto a surface that pulsed and shifted beneath me. When I could finally lift my head, I gasped at the world around me. The sky, if you could call it that, was a swirling vortex of colors that shouldn't exist, punctuated by flashes of geometric lightning. The ground undulated like a living thing, patterns flowing across its surface in mesmerizing, nauseating waves. In the distance, I could see structures that defied Euclidean geometry, twisting and folding in on themselves in ways that hurt my brain to look at. And all around, strange, alien flora pulsed and writhed, reaching out with tendrils that seemed to search the air. "Oh God," I whispered, struggling to my feet. What is this place? I clutched the carved bark to my chest, noticing with relief that it had made the journey intact. The symbols glowed faintly, providing a small measure of comfort in this alien hellscape. As my eyes adjusted to the bizarre lighting, I noticed movement in the distance. At first, I thought it was just another aspect of this ever-shifting world. But as I focused, my heart leapt into my throat. It was Sarah. She was running, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette with tangled strings. And behind her, pursuing with a relentless, undulating gait, was something. I couldn't make out details at this distance, but what I could see was enough to send shivers down my spine. It was massive, a writhing mass of tentacles and eyes and things that had no right to exist in any sane universe. "Sarah!" I shouted, my voice sounding flat and wrong in the alien atmosphere. "Sarah, over here." She turned at the sound of my voice, and even from this distance I could see that she had changed. Her skin had a translucent quality, shot through with pulsing veins of an otherworldly light. Her eyes, when they met mine, glowed with an inner fire that was decidedly inhuman. "Alex?" Her voice was a discordant chorus, as if multiple beings were speaking through her at once. "You came. You shouldn't have come." I started running towards her, my feet slipping on the ever-shifting ground. "I'm here to take you home, Sarah. You and Mike both." As I got closer, I could see her more clearly. The changes were even more pronounced up close. Her limbs were too long, joints bending in impossible ways. Her fingers ended in sharp points that looked more like claws than human hands. "Home?" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass and singing birds. "This is home now, Alex. This is evolution. This is transcendence." The thing pursuing her was getting closer. I could hear it now, a sound like wet meat slapping against stone, punctuated by a high-pitched keening that set my teeth on edge. "No time to argue," I said, grabbing her arm. I tried not to flinch at how wrong her flesh felt beneath my fingers. "We have to go now," she resisted, her strength far greater than it should have been. "You don't understand, Alex. We can't leave. We're part of it now, part of the greater whole." The pursuing creature let out a roar that shook the very air around us. I turned to look at it, and immediately wished I hadn't. It was a nightmarish amalgamation of flesh and geometry, tentacles and fractals, eyes and mouths, where no eyes and mouths should be. "Sarah, please," I begged, holding up the carved bark. The symbols pulsed brightly in the presence of the monster. "This isn't you. This isn't our world. We need to go back." For a moment I saw a flicker of the old Sarah in her glowing eyes. Fear, confusion, a desperate plea for help. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by an alien hunger. "If you won't join us willingly," she hissed, her voice no longer even slightly human, "then you'll be made to join. The hunger must be fed. The transition must continue." She lunged at me with inhuman speed, her clawed hands reaching for my throat. I stumbled backward, holding the carved bark between us like a talisman. The symbols flared to life, and Sarah recoiled with a shriek of pain and fury. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'll find a way to save you, I promise." With one last look at the thing that used to be my friend, I turned and ran. The undulating landscape made every step a challenge, and I could hear both Sarah and the larger monster in pursuit. As I ran, I frantically searched my memories of Dr. Marsh's journal and the knowledge imparted by the altar. There had to be a way to reverse this, to bring Sarah and Mike back to themselves. But first, I needed to survive long enough to figure it out. I spotted a cluster of those twisted alien trees ahead. Their tentacle-like branches reached for me as I approached, but they seemed to shy away from the glowing symbols I carried. "Okay," I panted, ducking behind the largest of the trees. "Think, Alex, what's the plan?" I could hear Sarah and the monster getting closer, their unearthly cries echoing across the twisted landscape. I clutched the carved bark to my chest, feeling its faint warmth, and made a decision. Find Mike, I said to myself. Find Mike, figure out how to reverse the transformation, and get the hell out of here. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all I had. With a deep breath, I peered around the tree, trying to get my bearings in this impossible world. In the distance, I saw a structure that looked vaguely like a temple, its architecture an affront to the laws of physics. Something told me that if answers were to be found in this nightmare realm, they'd be there. Hang on, guys, I whispered, gathering my courage. I'm not giving up on you. The alien landscape stretched before me, a nightmarish canvas of impossible geometry and writhing organic matter. Every step was a challenge, the ground beneath my feet shifting and pulsating as if alive. The air itself felt wrong, thick and acrid, burning my lungs with each labored breath. I clutched the carved bark tightly, its faintly glowing symbols providing my only sense of direction in this chaotic realm. The temple-like structure I'd spotted earlier loomed in the distance, seeming to twist and contort as I approached, defying my attempts to gauge its true size or shape. As I picked my way across the undulating terrain, I became acutely aware of movement all around me. Shapeless creatures slithered and oozed in my peripheral vision, always just out of clear sight. Strange, keening cries echoed across the landscape, setting my teeth on edge. "Focus, Alex," I muttered to myself. "Find Sarah. Find Mike. Get out of here." A sudden screech from above sent me diving for cover behind a cluster of pulsating fleshy growths that might have been this world's equivalent of plants. I looked up to see a flock of something wheeling overhead. They had too many wings, too many eyes, their bodies constantly shifting and reforming as they flew. As they passed, I emerged from my hiding spot, heart pounding. That's when I saw her. Sarah stood atop a small rise about 100 yards away, her back to me. Even from this distance, I could see how dramatically she had changed. Her body seemed elongated, limbs bending at impossible angles. Her skin had a translucent quality, shot through with pulsing veins of otherworldly light. "Sarah," I called out, my voice sounding flat and wrong in the alien atmosphere. She turned and I had to stifle a gasp. Her face was still recognizably Sarah's, but her eyes glowed with an inner fire, and her mouth was filled with far too many needle-sharp teeth. "Sarah, it's me," I said, approaching cautiously. "It's Alex. I've come to take you home." She tilted her head at an unnatural angle, regarding me with those glowing eyes. When she spoke, her voice was a discordant chorus of tones. "Alex, I know this name, but it means nothing here. There is no home but this." I held up the carved bark, its symbols pulsing brightly. "This isn't you, Sarah. This place, it's changed you. But I can help. We can go back." For a moment, I saw a flicker of recognition in her alien eyes. "Alex? Is it really—" "No." She clutched her head, her form seeming to ripple and shift. "The old self is gone. We are one with the beyond now." I took another step closer, reaching out to her. "Fight it, Sarah. Remember who you are. Remember home." Suddenly, the air around us grew thick with shadows. They coalesced into vaguely humanoid shapes, their edges blurring and reforming constantly. A bone-deep chill swept over me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Sarah hissed, her form elongating further as she crouched defensively. "The feeders! They hunger for your fear, Alex. Run!" I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed Sarah's distorted hand, trying not to flinch at its alien texture, and ran. The shadow creatures, the feeders, gave chase, moving with a silent, gliding motion that was somehow more terrifying than any normal pursuit. As we ran, I noticed Sarah becoming more lucid, more like her old self. "Alex, I remember. What's happening to me?" "I don't know," I panted, pulling her along. "But I'm going to fix it, I promise." We ducked behind a twisted spire of rock, its surface crawling with iridescent patterns. The feeders flowed past us, their shadowy forms seeming to absorb the already dim light around them. Once they had passed, I turned to Sarah. "Are you okay? Do you know where Mike is?" She shook her head, her form still fluctuating between human and something decidedly not. Time. Time is wrong here. How long have we been in this place?" I checked my watch, but the display was a meaningless swirl of digits. "I don't know. It feels like hours since I arrived, but..." I trailed off, a horrible thought occurring to me. "Sarah, how long do you think you've been here?" Her glowing eyes widened. "Days? Weeks? It's all a blur. But that can't be right. We only entered the mist this morning." A chill ran down my spine. Time moved differently here, warped like everything else in this nightmare realm. How long had Sarah and Mike been exposed to this place's corrupting influence? "We need to find Mike," I said, gripping the carved bark tightly. "Before it's too late." Sarah nodded, her movements becoming more fluid, more inhuman again. "Yes, Mike. I remember Mike. He went to the temple, said he heard voices calling him." I looked toward the distant, twisted structure. "Then that's where we're going." We set off across the alien landscape, Sarah moving with an unnatural grace while I stumbled and slipped on the ever-shifting ground. The temple grew larger as we approached, its architecture becoming no less maddening up close. As we neared the base of the structure, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was Mike's voice, but wrong, a deep, resonant tone underlaid with a high-pitched keening. "Welcome, Alex. We've been waiting for you." Mike stepped out from behind a twisted column, and I had to fight the urge to run. He had changed even more drastically than Sarah. His body was a chaos of shifting flesh and geometric patterns, extra limbs sprouting and retracting as I watched. His face was barely recognizable, dominated by a multitude of eyes that blinked in unsettling patterns. "Mike," I whispered, holding up the carved bark like a shield. "My God, what happened to you?" He smiled, revealing row upon row of crystalline teeth. "Happened? I have ascended, Alex. This realm has opened my eyes, all of them, to the true nature of reality. And now you can join us." Sarah moved to stand beside Mike, her earlier lucidity fading. "Yes, Alex, join us. Become one with the beyond. It's beautiful here once you let go of your limited human perception." I backed away, my mind reeling. "This isn't you. Either of you. This place is corrupting you, changing you into something you're not." Mike laughed, a sound like shattering glass and grinding stone. "Oh, Alex, still clinging to your narrow view of existence. Let us show you the truth." He reached out with multiple arms, his flesh rippling and changing color. Sarah's form began to elongate, stretching towards me like living taffy. I could feel the pull of their alien influence, a seductive whisper in my mind, promising cosmic understanding and transcendence. For a moment I was tempted. The secrets of the universe laid bare before me. An existence beyond the limitations of humanity, power and knowledge beyond imagining. But then I thought of home, of the world I'd left behind, of Sarah and Mike as they were, not these twisted caricatures before me. I gripped the carved bark tighter, its symbols flaring to life. "No," I said firmly, backing away. "This isn't real. This isn't who you are, and I'm going to find a way to bring you back." Mike's many eyes narrowed. "You cannot resist the truth forever, Alex. The beyond calls to all. It's only a matter of time." I turned and ran, my friend's inhuman cries echoing behind me. Tears streamed down my face as I fled, the full weight of my task hitting me. How could I possibly save them when they didn't want to be saved? How could I fight an entire dimension that seemed bent on corrupting everything it touched? As I ran, a thought occurred to me. The symbols on the bark, the ones that had guided me here and seemed to repel the worst of this place's influence. If I could find a way to amplify their power, maybe I could use them to reverse the corruption. I looked back at the temple, its impossible architecture now a beacon of hope rather than terror. The answers I needed had to be in there. I just had to find a way inside without succumbing to the madness that had claimed my friends. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself for what was to come. "Hang on, guys," I whispered. "I'm not giving up on you. Not ever." With renewed determination, I set off towards the temple, the fate of my friends, and possibly my entire reality, hanging in the balance. The alien landscape seemed to pulse with malevolent energy as I made my way towards the twisted temple. Each step was a struggle, not just against the ever-shifting terrain, but against the growing sense of wrongness in my own body. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a pool of iridescent liquid and nearly stumbled in shock. My skin had taken on a faint, otherworldly sheen, and I could have sworn I saw patterns moving beneath its surface. My eyes, once a mundane brown, now held flecks of colors that shouldn't exist. "No," I whispered, touching my face with trembling hands. "It's happening to me too." I clutched the carved bark tighter, its symbols pulsing reassuringly. But even that comfort was tempered by the realization that I could now perceive wavelengths of light that no human eye should be able to see. As I neared the temple, a sound like a cosmic heartbeat filled the air. The very fabric of reality seemed to ripple with each pulse. And there, at the heart of the structure, I saw it, the source of all this madness. A massive pulsating orb hung suspended in the center of the temple, its surface a swirling maelstrom of mist and energy. Tendrils of fog reached out from it, twisting and coiling through the air like living things. "The gateway," I breathed, understanding dawning with horrifying clarity. This was the source of the mist, the portal between our world and this nightmare realm. As I stood there transfixed by the otherworldly sight, a voice spoke behind me. A voice I recognized, yet didn't. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I spun around to see Lisa, another member of our hiking group. But like Sarah and Mike, she had been twisted by this place. Her body seemed to phase in and out of reality, leaving after images with each movement. Her eyes were pools of swirling mist. "Lisa," I said, backing away slowly. "What happened to you?" She smiled, her teeth too sharp, too numerous. "I've been enlightened, Alex. We all have. Well, almost all of us." Her gaze flicked to the carved bark in my hands. "You're still resisting. Why?" I held up the bark like a shield. "This isn't enlightenment, Lisa. It's corruption. This place is changing us, destroying who we are." Lisa laughed, the sound echoing strangely, as if coming from multiple throats. "Oh, Alex. Still clinging to your limited human perspective. Let me show you the truth." She reached out, her fingers elongating impossibly. I tried to dodge, but I was too slow. Her hand passed through my chest, and suddenly my mind was flooded with visions of cosmic horror and beauty beyond comprehension. I saw the true nature of reality, layers upon layers of dimensions, all interconnected. I saw beings of unimaginable power and terror, sleeping in the spaces between worlds. And I saw how our presence here was causing ripples across the multiverse, destabilizing the delicate balance between dimensions. When Lisa withdrew her hand, I fell to my knees, gasping. The knowledge burned in my brain, threatening to overwhelm my sanity. "Do you see now?" Lisa asked, her voice a chorus of whispers. "We're part of something greater. Our transformation is necessary for the survival of all realities." I struggled to my feet, my mind reeling. "No," I managed to say, though my voice shook. "There has to be another way. We can't just give up our humanity." Lisa's expression hardened. "Then you leave us no choice." From the shadows of the temple emerged more figures, the rest of our hiking group, all transformed into nightmarish versions of themselves. Tom's body was a mass of writhing tentacles. Emily's skin had become transparent, revealing a swirling cosmos beneath. And bringing up the rear was Sarah, her form now more mist than solid matter. "Join us, Alex," they spoke in unison, their voices a cacophony of inhuman tones. "Embrace the change. Help us bring enlightenment to our world." I backed away, my heart pounding. "Stay back. I won't let you do this." But even as I said it, I could feel the corruption spreading through my body. My vision blurred, new colors bleeding into existence. I could feel my bones shifting, trying to rearrange themselves into impossible configurations. In that moment, I made a decision that would haunt me forever. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I can't save you all." With a burst of desperate energy, I lunged forward, shoving past Lisa and Tom. I grabbed Sarah's misty form, feeling her solidify slightly at my touch. With my other hand, I snatched at Mike, who had been lurking at the edge of the group. "No!" Lisa shrieked, her voice shaking the very air. "Stop him!" But it was too late. Clutching Sarah and Mike, I turned and ran, heading back the way I'd come. Behind us, the others gave chase, their warped bodies allowing them to move in ways that defied physics. "Alex, what are you doing?" Sarah's voice was a confused jumble of human and otherworldly tones. "We need to go back. We need to become one with the beyond." "No," I panted, pulling them along. "I'm getting you out of here. I can't save everyone, but I'm not leaving my best friends behind." Mike's many eyes blinked in unsettling patterns. "You don't understand what you're doing, Alex. The Gateway needs us. Reality itself is at stake." I ignored their protests, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. The carved bark in my hand pulsed stronger than ever, seeming to push back against the corrupting influence of this place. As we ran, I could feel Sarah and Mike changing, fluctuating between their corrupted forms and something closer to human. It was as if my determination, combined with the power of the symbols, was fighting against the transformation. But I was changing too. My legs moved too quickly, covering impossible distances with each stride. My vision had expanded, allowing me to see in all directions at once, and I could feel the mist trying to seep into my mind, whispering promises of cosmic enlightenment. "Almost there," I gasped, though I had no idea where there was. I just knew we had to get away from the temple, away from the source of the corruption. Suddenly, the ground beneath our feet began to shake violently. I risked a glance back and saw the temple collapsing in on itself, the pulsating orb at its center growing larger, more unstable. "No!" Lisa's voice boomed across the landscape. "You're destabilizing the Gateway. You'll destroy both worlds." I realized with horror that she was right. I could feel it. The fabric of reality stretching, tearing. Our presence here, our resistance to the transformation, was causing a chain reaction that threatened to unravel everything. "What have I done?" I whispered, coming to a stop. Sarah and Mike stood beside me, their forms still fluctuating wildly. The others were closing in, their bodies twisting and merging as the destabilization grew worse. I looked down at the carved bark, its symbols now blazing with blinding light. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. "I'm so sorry," I said to Sarah and Mike. "I thought I could save you. I thought I could save everyone. But I was wrong." Before they could react, I shoved them away with all my strength. They tumbled back, towards the approaching group of corrupted hikers. "Alex, no!" Sarah cried, her voice almost human again. "Don't do this," Mike added, reaching out with too many arms. But I was already turning away, running towards the collapsing temple. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched the carved bark to my chest. "I love you guys," I called back. "Never forget who you really are." As I approached the pulsating orb, now grown to massive proportions, I could feel reality itself bending around me. The carved bark burned in my hands, its symbols seemingly etched into my very skin. With a final, desperate cry, I leaped into the heart of the Gateway. The last thing I heard was the anguished cries of my friends, both human and corrupted, as the world exploded into blinding light and impossible geometries. In that moment between moments, as I felt myself being torn apart and remade, I had one final thought. I hope I've done enough. I hope they can find their way back home. The world exploded into a cacophony of light and sound, reality itself seeming to tear at the seams. I felt my body being pulled apart and reassembled, atoms scattering across dimensions before snapping back together. Through it all, I clung desperately to Sarah's hand, terrified that if I let go, I'd lose her forever. When the chaos finally subsided, I found myself face down on damp earth, the smell of pine and decaying leaves filling my nostrils. For a moment, I just lay there, afraid to open my eyes, afraid that this was just another trick of that nightmarish other world. "Alex?" Sarah's voice, blessedly human, broke the silence. Are we back?" Slowly, I raised my head and opened my eyes. We were in a forest clearing, sunlight filtering through a canopy of normal earth trees. No twisted geometries, no impossible colors. Just the Tongass National Forest as it should be. "I think so," I said, my voice hoarse. I pushed myself to my feet, helping Sarah up as well. "How do you feel?" Sarah looked at her hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. "Strange. Like I'm not quite all here. But human. Definitely human again." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. There was a hollowness inside me, as if something essential had been left behind in that other place. But we were alive, and we were home. That's when I realized something was wrong. "Mike," I said, spinning around. "Where's Mike?" Sarah's eyes widened with horror. "Oh God. The last thing I remember, he was right behind us as we ran for the portal, but then..." Her voice trailed off, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. I pulled her into a hug, my own grief threatening to overwhelm me. "We'll find him," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. Maybe he came through somewhere else. As we stood there, trying to come to terms with Mike's absence, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. A faint tendril of mist was curling around a nearby tree, seeming to pulse with an otherworldly energy. "Sarah," I said quietly, "look." She turned, gasping as she saw the mist. No, it can't be. We closed the portal, didn't we?" I shook my head, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. "I don't think we did. I think we might have brought part of it back with us." As if in response to my words, the mist began to spread, tendrils reaching out to caress other trees, the forest floor, even the air itself. And with it came a whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Join us. Become one. Transcend." Sarah clutched my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Alex, we have to do something. We can't let it spread here." I nodded, my mind racing. "The symbols," I said suddenly. "The ones on that piece of bark. They seemed to repel the mist, remember?" I reached into my pocket, praying that the carved bark had somehow made the journey with us. My fingers closed around something solid, and I pulled it out with trembling hands. The bark was there, the symbol still faintly glowing. "Okay," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We need to find the source of the mist and use these symbols to close it off for good." Sarah nodded, her face set with determination. "Lead the way." We set off through the forest, following the tendrils of mist back to their source. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The forest seemed older, more overgrown than I remembered. "Sarah," I said slowly, "how long do you think we were over there?" She frowned, considering. "I don't know. It felt like days, maybe weeks, but time moved so strangely there." "Why?" I gestured to the forest around us. "Look at how overgrown everything is, and the position of the sun. I think it might have been longer than we thought." As we emerged from a thick cluster of trees, we found ourselves on the edge of the campground where our hike had begun. What we saw there stopped us in our tracks. The campground was a hive of activity. Police cars, forest ranger vehicles, and what looked like scientific equipment were scattered everywhere. People in hazmat suits moved about, taking readings and samples. "What the hell?" Sarah whispered. Before I could respond, a shout went up. "Over there, survivors!" Suddenly, we were surrounded by people in protective gear, voices overlapping as they barked orders and asked questions. Through it all, one phrase kept repeating, "Been missing for 6 weeks." 6 weeks. We'd been gone for a month and a half. As the initial chaos subsided, a man who seemed to be in charge approached us. His hazmat suit had Dr. Reeves written on the chest. "I'm Dr. Alan Reeves," he said, his voice muffled by his mask. "We've been searching for you and your friends for weeks. Can you tell us what happened?" I opened my mouth to respond, but Sarah cut me off. "Doctor, there's no time. Something came back with us, something dangerous. We need to contain it before it spreads." Dr. Reeves tilted his head, his expression unreadable behind his faceplate. "What do you mean? Something came back with you?" As if on cue, a scream rang out from the edge of the campground. We all turned to see tendrils of mist creeping into the clearing, writhing and pulsing with otherworldly energy. "That," I said grimly, "that came back with us." The campground erupted into chaos. People ran in all directions, some towards the mist with scientific curiosity, others away in terror. Dr. Reeves barked orders into a radio, calling for containment protocols. "Listen to me," I said, grabbing his arm. "Normal containment won't work. This isn't just mist. It's a gateway to another dimension, and it's trying to spread here." Dr. Reeves stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. "What do we need to do?" I held up the carved bark. "These symbols, they have power over the mist. We need to use them to close the portal for good." As Dr. Reeves examined the bark, Sarah tugged on my sleeve. "Alex," she said, her voice tight with fear. "Look." I followed her gaze and felt my blood run cold. There, at the edge of the mist, was a figure. It was mostly hidden in shadow, but I could make out multiple limbs, a body that seemed to shift and change with each movement, and eyes, too many eyes, all fixed on us. "Mike," I whispered. The thing that had once been our friend took a step forward, its voice a chorus of whispers. "Alex, Sarah, come back to us. The beyond calls. The transformation must continue." Sarah's grip on my arm tightened. "What do we do?" I looked at the carved bark in my hand, then at the approaching mist, then back at Mike's twisted form. A plan began to form in my mind, desperate and dangerous. "Dr. Reeves," I said, turning to the scientist, "I need you to evacuate everyone from this area. Sarah and I are going back in." "What?" Sarah and Dr. Reeves exclaimed in unison. I held up a hand to forestall their objections. "The portal needs to be closed from both sides. It's the only way to make sure it never opens again, and..." I swallowed hard, looking at Mike. "And we need to try to save our friend." Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what I was proposing. "Alex, it's suicide. We barely made it out the first time." "I know," I said softly, "but we can't leave Mike behind, and we can't let this spread to our world. We're the only ones who understand what we're dealing with." After a moment of tense silence, Sarah nodded. "Okay, let's do it." Dr. Reeves looked between us, clearly conflicted. Finally, he sighed. "I hope you know what you're doing. We'll evacuate the area and try to contain the spread as best we can. Good luck." As the campground emptied, Sarah and I stood at the edge of the encroaching mist. I held the carved bark out in front of us, its symbols glowing brightly. "Ready?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah took my hand, squeezing it tightly. "Ready." Together, we stepped into the mist. The world began to twist and distort around us, reality bending as we crossed the threshold between dimensions. The last thing I saw of our world was Dr. Reeves watching us disappear, a look of awe and terror on his face. Then we were falling, tumbling through impossible spaces, towards a fate we couldn't begin to imagine. But we were together, and we had a mission. Close the portal. Save Mike. Save both worlds. The alien landscape materialized around us, a nightmarish tableau of impossible geometry and writhing organic matter. The air shimmered with otherworldly energies, and in the distance the twisted spire of the temple loomed ominously. Sarah gripped my hand tightly, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "We made it," she whispered. "But now what?" I held up the carved bark, its symbols glowing even brighter in this realm. "We find the heart of the portal and use these to close it for good." As we made our way towards the temple, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Shadows seemed to move at the edges of our vision, and strange, discordant whispers echoed on the wind. "Alex," Sarah said suddenly, pointing ahead. "Look." There, standing before the entrance to the temple, was a figure. As we drew closer, my heart clenched. It was Mike, or what was left of him. His body was a shifting mass of tentacles and geometric shapes, his face a kaleidoscope of eyes and mouths. "Welcome back," Mike's voice resonated, a chorus of tones that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We knew you would return. The Beyond calls to all, in the end." I stepped forward, holding the carved bark like a shield. "Mike, we're here to help you, to take you home." Mike's laugh was a sound of shattering glass and grinding stone. "Home? This is home now, Alex. The gateway must remain open. The transformation must continue." "No," I said firmly. "We're closing the portal, Mike, for good. And we're taking you with us." Mike's form rippled, growing larger. "You don't understand. You can't understand. But you will. Everyone will." Suddenly, tendrils of mist shot out from Mike's body, wrapping around Sarah and pulling her away from me. She cried out, struggling against the otherworldly fog. "Sarah!" I shouted, reaching for her. But more mist was pouring from the temple entrance, swirling around us in a vortex of alien energy. I could feel it trying to seep into my mind, whispering promises of cosmic enlightenment and power beyond imagining. Fighting against the influence, I pushed my way into the temple, the carved bark held out before me. The symbols pulsed with increasing intensity as I approached the heart of the structure. There, suspended in the center of a vast chamber, was the portal itself, a swirling maelstrom of energy and mist, pulsing like a cosmic heartbeat. Around its edges I could see glimpses of our world, the forest we had left behind. As I stared into the portal, understanding washed over me. The symbols on the bark weren't just a protection, they were a key. A way to lock the door between worlds. But the cost... "Alex!" Sarah's voice rang out behind me. She had broken free of the mist and now stood in the temple entrance, Mike's twisted form looming behind her. "Whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. We'll find another way." I turned to her, a sad smile on my face. "There is no other way, Sarah. The portal has to be closed from this side. Someone has to stay behind." Sarah's eyes widened in horror. "No, I won't let you sacrifice yourself. It's the only way," I said softly. "You need to go back, warn our world about what's coming, prepare them." Mike's voice boomed through the chamber. "You cannot stop the inevitable, Alex. The Beyond will not be denied." I ignored him, focusing on Sarah. "Take this," I said, tearing off a small piece of the carved bark and pressing it into her hand. "Use it to keep the mist at bay in our world. And Sarah, tell my family I love them." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she clutched the bark fragment. "Alex, please." But there was no more time for goodbyes. The mist was growing thicker, more insistent. With a burst of desperate energy, I shoved Sarah towards the portal. "Go," I shouted. "Now!" As Sarah stumbled through the gateway, casting one last anguished look at me, I turned to face the heart of the portal. The carved bark burned in my hands as I began to recite the symbols, my voice growing stronger with each word. The chamber shook, reality itself seeming to buckle under the power of the ancient language. Mike's distorted form lunged at me, but a barrier of energy sprang up, keeping him at bay. As I continued the ritual, I saw glimpses of the horrors that had been waiting to pour through into our world. Vast, cosmic entities that defied comprehension. Civilizations built on suffering and madness. A universe of nightmare and wonder that would have consumed everything we knew and loved. The mist swirled around me, taking on familiar shapes. My parents, my friends, even Sarah, all reached out to me, begging me to stop, to join them in transcendence. But I pressed on, each symbol spoken sealing the gateway a little more. I could feel my connection to my own world growing weaker, my memories of home becoming hazy and indistinct. But still I continued, pouring every ounce of my humanity into the ritual. As I spoke the final symbol, a blinding light filled the chamber. The portal contracted, collapsing in on itself with a sound like the death cry of a universe. In that last moment, I saw Sarah emerge safely on the other side, turning back with a look of despair as the gateway sealed shut. Then, silence. I stood there, in the now dark chamber, the spent bark crumbling to ash in my hands. Outside, I could hear the alien landscape shifting, adjusting to the sudden absence of the portal's energy. Mike's voice, now small and confused, came from the darkness. "Alex, what have you done?" I turned to face my friend, seeing a flicker of his old self in the chaos of his transformed body. "What I had to do, Mike, to save both worlds." As the reality of our situation sank in, I felt a profound sense of loss, but also a glimmer of hope. We were trapped here, in this alien realm, perhaps for eternity, but we were also free from the corrupting influence of the mist, free to find our own path in this strange, new existence. I reached out to Mike, my own body already beginning to adapt to this world in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. "Come on," I said softly. "We have a lot to figure out." As we stepped out of the temple into the alien landscape beyond, I cast one last look at where the portal had been. Somewhere on the other side of that now sealed gateway was everything and everyone I had ever known and loved. But I had made my choice. I had sacrificed everything to save two worlds. And now, in this realm of impossible wonders and cosmic horrors, a new journey was just beginning. The mist may have been contained, but our story was far from over. The steady beep of medical equipment was the first sound that penetrated the fog of unconsciousness. Slowly, painfully, I opened my eyes, wincing at the harsh fluorescent lights above. The sterile smell of disinfectant filled my nostrils, a stark contrast to the alien scents I remembered from... where? A dream? Alex? Oh, thank God you're awake. I turned my head to see Sarah sitting beside my bed, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Sarah?" My voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "What? Where am I?" She squeezed my hand, her touch grounding me in reality. "You're in the hospital. You've been unconscious for 3 days." 3 days. The words echoed in my mind, bringing with them a flood of disjointed memories. The hike, the mist, the other world. Mike, the portal. I bolted upright, ignoring the pain that shot through my body. "The mist. Sarah, we have to..." "Shh. It's okay," Sarah soothed, gently pushing me back onto the bed. "It's over. The forest is fine. There's no sign of what we saw." I stared at her, my mind reeling. "But how?" "I remember closing the portal. I stayed behind. Sarah's expression tightened. "I don't know, Alex. When I came through the portal, you were right behind me. We both collapsed, and the search team found us shortly after. They said we'd been missing for weeks, but neither of us can remember what happened during that time." I shook my head, trying to make sense of it all. "And Mike?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. They haven't found him yet. The search is still ongoing, but..." Her voice trailed off, but I understood. Mike was gone, lost to that other world. Or was he? Had any of it been real? Over the next few days, as I recovered in the hospital, I was questioned by doctors, psychiatrists, and even government officials. They all wanted to know what had happened during our missing weeks, but I couldn't give them the answers they wanted. How could I explain an experience that seemed more like a fever dream with each passing hour? Finally, after a week of tests and debriefings, I was allowed to go home. As I stepped out of the hospital into the bright sunlight, I felt a surge of relief. Everything looked normal. No twisted geometries, no impossible colors, just the familiar streets of my hometown. But as the days passed, I found it increasingly difficult to readjust to normal life. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced I could hear the whispers of the mist. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch glimpses of shadows moving in ways they shouldn't. And then there were the changes within me. Subtle at first, but undeniable. My senses seemed sharper, colors more vivid. I found I could solve complex mathematical equations in my head with ease, seeing patterns and connections that had always eluded me before. 1 month after our return, I met Sarah for coffee. As soon as I saw her, I knew she was experiencing similar things. "You feel it too, don't you?" I asked quietly, after we'd exchanged pleasantries. Sarah nodded, her eyes darting around nervously. I thought I was going crazy. "Alex, what's happening to us?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but I think we brought something back with us. Something that changed us." Sarah leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "Last night I had a dream. At least, I think it was a dream. I saw that other world, Alex. I saw Mike." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean you saw Mike?" "He was different," Sarah continued, her eyes unfocused as she recalled the vision. "Not like the twisted thing we saw in that place, but not entirely human either. He spoke to me, Alex. He said the gateway isn't fully closed, that there are still cracks between worlds." I sat back, my mind racing. If what Sarah was saying was true, then the danger wasn't over. The mist, the other world, it could still find a way through. As weeks turned into months, I found myself obsessively researching interdimensional theory, quantum physics, and ancient symbolism. I covered the walls of my apartment with equations and diagrams, searching for a way to understand what had happened to us and how to prevent it from happening again. Sarah and I grew closer during this time, bonded by our shared experience and the secret we carried. We were the only ones who truly understood what the other was going through. One night, as we pored over my latest calculations, Sarah suddenly gasped, "Alex, look!" I followed her gaze to the window and felt my blood run cold. Outside, a faint tendril of mist was curling up from the ground, glowing with an otherworldly light. We rushed outside, our hearts pounding. But by the time we reached the spot, the mist had vanished, leaving no trace behind. "We need to do something," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "We can't just wait for it to come back." I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. "We need to find the weak points, the places where the barrier between worlds is thinnest. If we can locate them, maybe we can find a way to strengthen the seal." And so began our secret mission. By day, we went about our normal lives, pretending everything was fine. But at night, we scoured the town and surrounding forest, using the heightened senses we'd gained to search for signs of interdimensional weak points. It was during one of these nocturnal expeditions that I had my first clear vision of the other world since our return. We were deep in the forest, near the spot where we'd first encountered the mist, when suddenly the world around me shifted. For a brief moment, I saw the alien landscape superimposed over our familiar forest. Twisted spires rose between the trees, and the ground writhed with otherworldly life. And there, in the distance, I saw a figure that made my heart stop. Mike stood at the edge of a cliff that hadn't been there a moment before, his body a shimmering, ever-changing form that hurt my eyes to look at directly. He turned to me, and though his face was barely recognizable, I could see the sadness in his many eyes. "Alex," his voice echoed in my mind. "The balance is shifting. The beyond seeks equilibrium. You must be ready." Before I could respond, the vision vanished, leaving me gasping and disoriented in the normal forest. "Alex! Alex!" Sarah's voice broke through my daze. "What happened? You just froze." I told her about the vision, watching as her face paled. "It's getting stronger, isn't it?" she whispered. "The connection between worlds." I nodded grimly. "We're running out of time. We need to find a way to seal the cracks for good." Over the next few weeks, we redoubled our efforts. We reached out to experts in fields ranging from theoretical physics to occult studies. always careful not to reveal too much about our true motivations. Slowly, we began to piece together a theory of how the dimensions intersected and how we might be able to reinforce the barriers between them. But even as we made progress, I could feel the other world pressing closer. My dreams were filled with visions of cosmic entities and impossible geometries. Sometimes I'd catch myself speaking in languages I didn't understand, my tongue forming words that no human throat should be able to produce. And then, on a quiet Sunday morning, 6 months after our return from the other world, it happened. I woke up to an unearthly silence. No birds chirping, no distant traffic noise. Nothing. I rushed to the window, my heart pounding in my chest. What I saw made me stumble back in shock. A thick, familiar mist was rolling down the street, pulsing with otherworldly energy. As I watched, frozen in horror and fascination, I saw shapes moving within the fog. Impossible shapes. Alien shapes. The barrier between worlds was crumbling, and the beyond was pushing through. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone to call Sarah. As it rang, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything we'd been through, everything we'd suffered and sacrificed had only been the beginning. The real battle for our world was about to begin. The mist clung to the trees of Pisgah National Forest like a ghostly shroud, obscuring the path ahead. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me as our group of 5 trudged deeper into the woods. The chill wasn't just from the damp air. There was something unsettling about this place, a heaviness that seemed to press down on us from all sides. "You sure this is the right way, Mike?" I called out to our guide, who was a few paces ahead. Mike turned, his weathered face creased with concentration. "According to the map, yeah. But I've never seen the forest like this before. It's different." Sarah, our wildlife biologist, piped up from behind me. "The fog is unusual for this time of year. It's almost as if..." "As if what?" I prompted, not liking the uncertainty in her voice. She shook her head. "Nothing. Just an odd weather pattern, I'm sure." We continued on in silence, the only sound the squelch of our boots in the muddy earth and the occasional snap of a twig. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, unseen eyes tracking our every move. Suddenly, Mike held up a hand, signaling us to stop. "Look," he whispered, pointing to the ground. We gathered around, peering at the mud. There, clear as day, was a set of footprints unlike anything I'd ever seen. They were large, easily twice the size of a human foot, with strange elongated toes that ended in what looked like claw marks. "What the hell made those?" whispered Tom, our resident skeptic. Sarah knelt down, her face a mask of fascination and fear. I don't know. These don't match any known species in this region. The stride length, the depth of the impression, whatever made these is big and heavy." My heart was racing now, a mix of excitement and dread coursing through my veins. As a cryptozoologist, this was the kind of discovery I'd dreamed of. But now, faced with the reality, I felt woefully unprepared. "Should we follow them?" asked Lisa, our photographer, her camera already out and snapping pictures of the prints. Mike looked at me, deferring to my expertise. I swallowed hard, weighing our options. "Yes," I finally said, "but we stay together. No one wanders off, understood?" They all nodded and we set off, following the bizarre trail deeper into the misty forest. The trees seemed to grow denser, their branches intertwining overhead to block out what little light managed to penetrate the fog. As we walked, the sense of unease grew stronger. The forest had gone eerily quiet. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. It was as if all other life had fled, leaving us alone with whatever had made those tracks. "Does anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Lisa whispered, her eyes darting nervously from tree to tree. I was about to respond when a sound cut through the silence, a shriek that was neither human nor animal, a sound that sent ice through my veins and made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We all froze, instinctively huddling closer together. "What the fuck was that?" Tom hissed, his earlier skepticism evaporating in an instant. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice shaky. but it came from up ahead, same direction as the tracks. Mike unshouldered his rifle, checking to make sure it was loaded. Maybe we should turn back, he suggested, a tremor in his usually steady voice. Part of me wanted to agree, to flee this oppressive forest and the nameless terror that lurked within it. But the scientist in me, the part that had always pushed me to seek out the unknown, wouldn't let me. "We keep going," I said, trying to inject confidence I didn't feel into my voice. "But stay alert. Whatever made that sound, it knows we're here." We pressed on, following the tracks. With each step, the fog seemed to thicken, reducing our visibility to mere feet in front of us. The tracks remained clear, however, as if mocking our growing fear. Suddenly, Sarah gasped, "The tracks! Look!" We all stared in disbelief. The footprints we'd been following so diligently simply stopped. One moment they were there, clear as day in the mud, and the next, nothing. It was as if whatever had made them had simply vanished into thin air. "This isn't possible," Tom muttered, running his hand through his hair in agitation. "Things don't just disappear." "Spread out," I ordered, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Search the area. There has to be some explanation." We fanned out, each taking a different direction, scanning the ground for any sign of the creature's passage. I moved slowly, my eyes darting from the ground to the surrounding trees, every sense on high alert. That's when I heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I spun around, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Guys?" I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened in the oppressive silence of the forest. No answer. "Mike? Sarah? Anyone?" Still nothing. The fog had thickened to the point where I could barely see my own hand in front of my face. I was alone, cut off from the others, with something unseen stalking me. A twig snapped behind me and I whirled around, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. Another growl, closer this time. I backed away slowly, my eyes straining to penetrate the mist. That's when I saw it. Or rather, didn't see it. A shimmer in the air, like heat haze on a summer day, but moving with purpose, moving towards me. I turned to run, but my foot caught on a root, sending me sprawling to the ground. I rolled over, scrambling backwards as the shimmer approached. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, or not seeing. Suddenly, the mist parted, and I caught a glimpse of the others huddled together not 20 feet away. "Here!" I shouted, relief flooding through me. "I'm over here!" They turned, their faces masks of terror. "Run!" Mike yelled, raising his rifle. "It's right behind you." I scrambled to my feet, my legs pumping furiously as I sprinted towards the group. I could hear it behind me, the heavy footfalls and that bone-chilling growl growing closer with each second. As I reached the others, Mike opened fire, the sound of the rifle deafening in the enclosed space of the forest. But his shots seemed to pass through empty air, the shimmer weaving and dodging with impossible speed. We huddled together, backs to each other, as the thing, whatever it was, circled us. The air rippled and distorted, branches snapping and undergrowth crushed by unseen feet. "What do we do?" Lisa whimpered, her camera clutched to her chest like a shield. I looked at the terrified faces around me, the weight of leadership heavy on my shoulders. We were in uncharted territory, facing something that defied explanation. But giving up wasn't an option. "We fight," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Whatever this thing is, it's real. And if it's real, we can hurt it. We can stop it." As if in response to my words, the creature let out another ear-splitting shriek. The hunt was on, but this time we were the prey. And as the thing closed in, its invisibility our greatest disadvantage, I realized with a sinking feeling that our adventure had only just begun, and the horrors that awaited us were beyond anything we could have imagined. The forest echoed with Tom's agonized scream as he was suddenly thrown to the ground by an invisible force. We watched in horror as 4 deep gashes appeared on his chest, blood seeping through his torn shirt. "Tom!" Sarah cried, rushing to his side. "Oh God, oh God!" I stood frozen, my eyes darting around wildly, trying to catch a glimpse of our attacker. But there was nothing to see, just the oppressive fog and the dark outlines of the trees. Mike raised his rifle, spinning in a slow circle. "Where is it? Where the hell is it?" The air shimmered slightly to my left. Without thinking, I grabbed Mike's arm and pointed. "There, shoot there." Mike didn't hesitate. He opened fire, the sound of the rifle deafening in the enclosed space. Bark exploded from trees, leaves shredded, but there was no sign that we'd hit anything. "Did we get it?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. As if in answer, a low growl emanated from behind us. We spun around, huddling closer together, with Sarah dragging the semi-conscious Tom into our protective circle. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, pressing a cloth to Tom's wounds. "He needs medical attention." I nodded, trying to think through the panic clouding my mind. "Okay, let's move. Mike, you take point. Lisa, help Sarah with Tom. I'll bring up the rear." We began to move, our progress slow and halting. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of fear through us. The fog seemed to thicken around us, limiting our visibility to just a few feet. Suddenly, I felt something brush against my arm, a touch so light it could have been a breeze, except there was no wind in this stifling forest. I let out an involuntary scream, jumping away and spinning around. "What? What is it?" Mike called back, his rifle at the ready. It touched me," I stammered, my skin crawling. I felt it, but there was nothing there. Lisa whimpered, her eyes wide with fear. "This can't be happening, this can't be real." But it was real. All too real. As we continued our slow progress through the forest, the sense of being stalked, of being toyed with, grew stronger. Occasionally, we'd catch a glimpse of that strange shimmer in the air, always just at the edge of our vision. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, we stumbled into a small clearing. And there, caught on a low-hanging branch, was a scrap of fabric. "Wait," I said, approaching it cautiously. As I got closer, my eyes widened in disbelief. The fabric seemed to bend the light around it, partially camouflaging itself against the forest backdrop. I reached out and touched it, surprised by its strange, almost oily texture. "What is it?" Sarah asked, still supporting the now conscious but groggy Tom. I turned the fabric over in my hands, my scientific curiosity momentarily overriding my fear. "I'm not sure. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. The way it bends light. It's almost like it's designed to make things invisible," Mike finished, his face pale. A chill ran down my spine as the implication sank in. "This isn't some undiscovered animal we're dealing with," I said slowly. "This is something made." "Made by who?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before I could answer, Tom let out a weak chuckle. "Isn't it obvious? The government? Military? Who else could pull off something like this?" We all fell silent, the only sound Tom's labored breathing and the ominous creaking of the trees around us. The idea that we might be up against some sort of military experiment was almost more terrifying than facing an unknown creature. "We need to keep moving," Mike said finally, breaking the tense silence. "Find a way out of this forest and get help." We had only taken a few steps when the undergrowth ahead of us suddenly parted, revealing a sight that made us all stop short. There, half hidden by vines and years of neglect, stood a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, and beyond it, barely visible through the mist, loomed the dark outline of a building. "Is that a military outpost?" Sarah breathed, her eyes wide. I nodded slowly, my mouth dry. "Looks like it. Abandoned from the state of it." Mike approached the fence cautiously, running his hand along the rusty metal. "This has to be where it came from. where it was created or escaped from, Tom added grimly. We all exchanged looks, the same thought clearly running through everyone's mind. If we went in there, we might find answers, but we might also be walking right into the lion's den. We don't have a choice, I said finally. Tom needs medical attention and we need shelter. Plus, there might be a radio or some way to call for help. Mike nodded, raising his rifle and using the butt to break the rusted lock on the gate. It fell away with a clang that seemed obscenely loud in the quiet forest. As we stepped through the gate, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crossing a point of no return. Whatever secrets this abandoned outpost held, whatever horrors awaited us inside, our lives would never be the same after this. We approached the main building slowly, our eyes constantly scanning for any sign of movement, any shimmer in the air that might betray the presence of our invisible stalker. The structure loomed before us, a decaying monument to whatever clandestine operations had once taken place here. The front door hung off its hinges, swinging slightly in a breeze we couldn't feel. Mike went in first, his rifle at the ready, while Sarah and Lisa helped Tom. I brought up the rear, constantly looking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the musty smell of abandonment. Broken furniture littered the floor and papers were strewn everywhere, but it was the walls that caught my attention, or rather, what was on them. My God, Sarah whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the sight. The walls were covered in schematics, diagrams, and hastily scribbled notes. Most of it was beyond my comprehension, but certain phrases jumped out at me. Project Eclipse, light refraction enhancement, subject behavioral modifications. They were trying to create the perfect stealth soldier, Tom said, his voice weak but filled with a grim sort of awe. Imagine it, a warrior that could move completely unseen. But something went wrong, Mike added, examining a board filled with what looked like incident reports. Look at this. Subject displaying increased aggression, loss of verbal communication skills, attacks on staff escalating. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the full implications of what we were facing. This wasn't just some animal, or even a normal human. This was something engineered, something that had been pushed beyond the limits of what was natural or safe. We need to find a way to contact the outside world, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There has to be a communication room or... I was cut off by a sound that made my blood run cold. The scrape of claws on metal, coming from somewhere deeper in the building. We all froze, hardly daring to breathe. For a moment, there was silence. Then a low rumbling growl echoed through the hallways. It followed us in. Lisa whimpered, her face pale with fear. Mike raised his rifle, his knuckles white on the grip. Stay together. We'll find that comm room and... He never finished his sentence. With a roar that shook dust from the ceiling, our invisible pursuer charged. We caught a glimpse of that telltale shimmer in the air, moving with terrifying speed. Run, I yelled, grabbing Lisa's arm and pulling her towards a doorway. We scattered, the sound of shattering furniture and tearing metal filling the air as the creature tore through the room. I could hear the others' panicked breathing and running footsteps, but in the chaos, I lost track of where everyone was. Lisa and I found ourselves in what looked like an old laboratory, filled with strange equipment and shattered glass containers. We crouched behind an overturned table, our hearts pounding so loudly I was sure the creature would hear. "What are we going to do?" Lisa whispered, her eyes wide with terror. I shook my head, my mind racing. We were trapped in an abandoned military outpost with an invisible, genetically engineered predator. Our group was separated, one of us was injured, and we had no way to call for help. As the sounds of destruction continued outside our hiding place, I realized with a sinking feeling that our ordeal was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The true terror lay ahead, in the dark corridors of this forsaken place where science had created a monster that now hunted us with ruthless efficiency. We huddled in the darkness, waiting for our moment to move, to fight, to survive. The lab was eerily quiet, save for the distant sounds of destruction echoing through the abandoned facility. Lisa and I remained crouched behind the overturned table, our breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. "We need to find the others," I whispered, my eyes darting around the room. Lisa nodded, her face pale with fear. "But how? That thing is out there." I scanned the lab, looking for anything that might help us. My eyes fell on a row of filing cabinets against the far wall. "There," I pointed. "Maybe we can find some information about what we're up against." We crept across the room, flinching at every creak of the floorboards beneath our feet. I pulled open the first drawer, rifling through the folders inside. Most were filled with incomprehensible scientific jargon, but then I found one labeled Project Eclipse, Final Report. With trembling hands, I opened the folder. As I read, I felt the blood drain from my face. "Oh God," I muttered. "What is it?" Lisa asked, peering over my shoulder. I swallowed hard. "It's worse than we thought. This wasn't just some military experiment gone wrong. They were trying to create the ultimate stealth soldier, a human being capable of bending light around themselves to become completely invisible." Lisa's eyes widened. "But how is that even possible?" I shook my head, skimming through the documents. Something about manipulating the subject's DNA, integrating it with genetic material from cephalopods, octopuses and squids. They can change their skin color and texture to blend in with their surroundings. As I continued reading, my stomach churned. The experiments were successful, too successful. The subjects gained the ability to become invisible, but there were side effects. "What kind of side effects?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned the page, revealing a series of incident reports. The subjects began to lose their humanity, increased aggression, loss of verbal skills, heightened predatory instincts. They went mad. Lisa gasped. "The creature out there, it's one of them, isn't it?" I nodded grimly. "An escaped test subject. According to this, there was a containment breach 6 months ago. 3 subjects escaped into the forest. They've been out there all this time hunting. A crash from somewhere in the building made us both jump." "We need to find the others," I said, stuffing the folder into my backpack. "They need to know what we're up against." We crept out of the lab, our senses on high alert. The hallway was a mess of overturned furniture and shattered equipment. As we turned a corner, we nearly collided with Mike and Sarah, who were supporting a weakened Tom between them. "Thank God," Sarah breathed. "We thought—" "No time," I cut her off. "We found out what's hunting us. It's not good." As quickly and quietly as I could, I filled them in on what we'd discovered. Their faces grew more horrified with each detail. "So we're up against some kind of invisible super soldier?" Mike asked, his grip tightening on his rifle. I nodded. "One that's lost its humanity and is operating on pure predatory instinct." Tom let out a weak chuckle. "Great. Just great. How the hell are we supposed to fight something like that?" We all fell silent, the gravity of our situation sinking in. Then Sarah spoke up. "Wait a minute. You said it was part cephalopod, right? Octopuses and squids?" I nodded, not sure where she was going with this. "Well, those animals use chromatophores to change color. Essentially, they're manipulating pigments in their skin. What if we could disrupt that somehow?" Mike's eyes lit up. "Like with paint or powder. If we could cover it in something, we might be able to see it." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. "That's brilliant. We need to set up some traps. There must be supplies around here we can use." We quickly formulated a plan. Using materials we found scattered throughout the facility, we set up a series of tripwires connected to buckets filled with a mixture of paint and cleaning powder. We rigged them in the main hallways, hoping to catch our invisible pursuer off guard. As night fell, we barricaded ourselves in what appeared to be an old security room. The monitors were dead, but the thick metal door made us feel marginally safer. We took turns keeping watch, jumping at every sound that echoed through the facility. It was during my watch in the dead of night that I heard it, the soft scrape of claws on concrete growing closer. "Everyone up?" I hissed, shaking the others awake. "It's coming." We huddled together in the darkness, barely daring to breathe. The sound grew louder, accompanied by that low, inhuman growl we'd come to dread. Suddenly, there was a loud crash followed by an ear-splitting shriek. One of our traps had been triggered. "We got it!" Mike exclaimed, reaching for the door. "Wait," I grabbed his arm. "We don't know if it worked. It could still be invisible." We listened intently. The shrieking had stopped, replaced by a series of angry snarls and the sound of thrashing. "I'm going to take a look," I said, my heart pounding. "Cover me." Slowly, I cracked open the door and peered out. In the dim emergency lighting, I could make out a bizarre sight. A vaguely humanoid shape thrashing on the ground covered in splatters of fluorescent paint. It wasn't completely visible, but the paint clung to an outline revealing its location. "It worked," I breathed. "We can see it." The creature suddenly stopped moving, its head snapping in our direction. Even partially visible, it was a terrifying sight. Long, distorted limbs, wickedly sharp claws, and a face that was a nightmarish blend of human and animal features. For a moment, we all froze, locked in a standoff with the monster. Then it let out an ear-splitting roar and charged towards us. "Back inside!" I yelled, slamming the door shut just as the creature crashed into it. The metal door shuddered under the impact. We could hear the creature snarling and clawing at the other side, determined to get to its prey. "What now?" Lisa cried, her eyes wide with terror. I looked around frantically, searching for anything we could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on a fire extinguisher in the corner. "I have an idea," I said, grabbing the extinguisher. "When I open the door, I'll spray it. The cold might disrupt its camouflage even more. Mike, be ready with your rifle." Everyone nodded, steeling themselves for what was to come. I took a deep breath, gripping the fire extinguisher tightly. "On 3, I said. 1, 2, 3. I yanked the door open and immediately started spraying. The creature, caught off guard, reeled back, letting out a shriek of surprise and pain. Its outline became even more distinct as the cold foam covered it. "Now, Mike," I yelled. Mike stepped forward, taking careful aim. The sound of gunfire filled the air as he emptied his clip into the creature. It thrashed and howled, its movements becoming more erratic with each hit. Finally, with one last, chilling shriek, the creature collapsed to the ground, motionless. We stood there, panting, hardly daring to believe it was over. Cautiously, we approached the fallen monster. In death, its camouflage had failed completely, revealing its true, horrifying form. Is it really dead?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I knelt down, examining the creature closely. "I think so. We did it. We actually did it." A wave of relief washed over us, but it was short-lived. As the adrenaline faded, a sobering realization set in. "There were 3 that escaped," Tom said weakly. "This was just one of them." We all exchanged grim looks. Our ordeal wasn't over. There were still 2 more of these things out there, hunting in the forest. And now they would be aware, prepared. The real battle was just beginning. As we gathered our wits and prepared to face the challenges ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling that our encounter with the invisible menace was far from over. The night was still young, and in the depths of Pisgah National Forest, unseen terrors awaited us. The forest was unnaturally quiet as we crept through the underbrush, our nerves frayed to the breaking point. After our harrowing encounter in the abandoned facility, we had decided to venture back into the woods, hoping to set traps for the remaining 2 invisible creatures before they could hunt us down. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Lisa whispered, her eyes darting nervously from tree to tree. I wiped sweat from my brow, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "It's our best shot. We know their weaknesses now. If we can trap them, we might have a chance." Mike nodded grimly, hefting his rifle. Better to be the hunters than the hunted. We had spent hours setting up an elaborate network of traps throughout a small clearing. Tripwires connected to paint-filled balloons, pits covered with leaves and filled with a sticky resin that would cling to anything that fell in, and motion-activated sprayers filled with a mixture of paint and ice-cold water. It wasn't much, but it was all we had. Now, hidden behind a thick cluster of bushes, we waited with bated breath. The sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, seemed amplified in the tense silence. "How long do we wait?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "As long as it takes," I replied, my eyes scanning the clearing. "They're out there. They'll come." Hours passed, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Just as I was beginning to think our plan had failed, a twig snapped somewhere to our left. We all froze, hardly daring to breathe. There it was again. The soft sound of footsteps, barely audible but growing closer. "Get ready," I mouthed silently to the others. The air in the clearing seemed to shimmer like heat haze on a summer day. One of our tripwires twitched, and for a moment my heart leapt with hope. But then, before our eyes, the wire simply came apart, as if invisible hands had delicately disconnected it. "That's impossible," Mike breathed, his face pale. We watched in horror as, one by one, our traps were systematically dismantled. Paint balloons were gently removed from their triggers. The covered pit was carefully skirted around. It was as if our invisible foes were mocking us, showing us just how outmatched we truly were. "They're smarter than we thought," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "They've evolved, learned." A low, rumbling growl cut through the air, sending chills down my spine. It was close. Too close. "Run!" I yelled, all pretense of stealth abandoned. We burst from our hiding spot, sprinting in different directions. I could hear the others crashing through the underbrush, their panicked breathing mixing with the sound of pursuit. I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning with each gasping breath. Behind me, I heard a scream, high-pitched and terrified. Lisa. Against my better judgment, I skidded to a stop, turning back. Through the trees, I caught a glimpse of her, suspended in midair as if held by invisible hands. Her eyes met mine, wide with terror. "Help me!" she screamed. But before I could move, she was yanked backwards, disappearing into the dense foliage. "Lisa!" I yelled, taking a step towards where she had vanished. But another growl, this one from much closer, froze me in my tracks. With a heavy heart, I turned and ran, Lisa's scream echoing in my ears. The forest seemed to close in around me, every shadow potentially hiding one of our invisible pursuers. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in the green maze of the forest. My legs burned. My lungs felt like they were on fire, but still I pushed on, driven by pure survival instinct. Suddenly the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I tumbled down a steep embankment, rocks and branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I came to a stop at the bottom, dazed and battered. As I lay there trying to catch my breath, the full weight of our situation crashed down upon me. We were hopelessly outmatched. Our traps, our plans, they meant nothing to these creatures. They were playing with us, like a cat toying with a mouse before the kill. I struggled to my feet, wincing at the pain that shot through my battered body. Looking around, I realized with a sinking feeling that I had no idea where I was. The others were gone, taken, or scattered like leaves in the wind. I was alone. The forest stretched out in every direction, dark and forbidding. Somewhere out there, the creatures were hunting, picking us off one by one, and I was trapped in their domain. A twig snapped behind me, and I spun around, my heart pounding. There was nothing there, but that meant nothing when dealing with invisible predators. "Hello," I called out, my voice hoarse. "Mike, Sarah, Tom, anyone." Only the eerie silence of the forest answered me. I began to walk, choosing a direction at random. Every step was an effort, my body protesting after the punishing run and fall. But I couldn't stop. To stop was to die. As I trudged on, my mind raced, trying to make sense of what had happened. How had the creatures dismantled our trap so easily? It wasn't just invisibility. They had displayed an intelligence, a problem-solving ability that was terrifyingly human. The sky darkened above me, the last rays of sunlight filtering through the canopy. Night was falling, and with it the temperature dropped. I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself. A rustle in the bushes to my left made me freeze. I held my breath, straining my ears. There it was again, the soft sound of movement, barely perceptible. "Who's there?" I called out, hating the tremor in my voice. "Show yourself." Silence. Then, a low growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I backed away slowly, my eyes darting around, searching for any sign of movement, any shimmer in the air that might betray the creature's presence. My back hit something solid, a tree. I pressed against it, feeling trapped. The growling grew louder, closer. I could feel the creature's presence, an oppressive weight in the air around me. In that moment, as terror clawed at my throat, a strange calm settled over me. This was it. This was how it would end. Alone in the dark forest, at the mercy of an unseen predator. But as I stood there, waiting for the final strike, a thought wormed its way into my mind. These creatures, for all their terrifying abilities, were once human. They were the product of human experimentation, human ambition gone awry. And if they were once human, maybe, just maybe, there was still a shred of humanity left in them. "Wait," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I know what you are. I know what they did to you. You don't have to do this." The growling stopped. For a moment the forest was utterly silent. Then, to my amazement, a voice spoke, rough, guttural, as if unused to forming words, but unmistakably human. "No, nothing," it growled. My heart raced. It could speak. It could understand. "I do know," I insisted. "I saw the files, the experiments. What they did to you was wrong. But this, what you're doing now, it's not the answer." There was a long pause. I could feel the creature's presence so close I could almost touch it. Then slowly the air in front of me shimmered and a form began to take shape. It was horrifying, a twisted amalgamation of human and animal, its skin mottled and shifting like a living camouflage. But its eyes were unmistakably human, filled with a pain and rage that took my breath away. "Help," it growled, the word seeming to cause it physical pain. "Help. Us." As I stood there, face to face with the creature we had been fleeing from, I realized that everything had changed. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about redemption. For the creatures, for the scientists who created them, for all of us. The hunt had been reversed, but not in the way I had expected. Now, we were on a new mission, to help these tortured beings and to expose the truth behind their creation. As the creature and I regarded each other in the gathering darkness, I knew that our ordeal was far from over. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had a chance, not just to survive, but to make things right. The forest floor was damp and cold beneath my hands as I crawled through the dense underbrush. Every movement sent waves of pain through my battered body, but I forced myself to keep going. The encounter with the creature had left me shaken, both physically and mentally. Despite its moment of apparent humanity, the beast had quickly reverted to its predatory nature. Only my quick reflexes and a fortunate stumble had saved me from its savage attack. Now I was reduced to crawling, trying to put as much distance between myself and the creature as possible. My vision swam, exhaustion threatening to overtake me. "Stay awake," I muttered to myself, gritting my teeth against the pain. "Stay awake, or you're dead." As I dragged myself forward, my mind raced, replaying every encounter, every piece of information we'd gleaned about these creatures. There had to be a weakness, something we'd overlooked. I paused, leaning against a tree trunk to catch my breath. "Think," I whispered. "What do you know?" I closed my eyes, trying to organize my thoughts. The creatures were the result of genetic experiments combining human and cephalopod DNA. They could bend light around themselves, becoming nearly invisible. They were incredibly strong and fast. But they weren't invincible. We'd managed to kill one back at the facility. The cold, I realized, my eyes snapping open. The fire extinguisher disrupted its camouflage. A twig snapped nearby, jolting me back to the present. I held my breath, listening intently. The forest had gone eerily quiet, a sure sign that one of the creatures was near. Slowly, carefully, I started moving again, every sense on high alert. I needed to find shelter, some place to regroup and form a plan. As if in answer to my silent plea, I caught a glimpse of something through the trees, the dark outline of a structure. Hope surged through me, giving me a burst of energy. I quickened my pace, half crawling, half stumbling towards the building. As I drew closer, I could make out more details. It was a small cabin, weathered and clearly abandoned for some time. I reached the door, my hands shaking as I grasped the handle. To my immense relief, it turned easily. I practically fell inside, quickly shutting the door behind me and leaning against it, my heart pounding. The interior of the cabin was musty and dark. Dust covered every surface and cobwebs hung in the corners. But to me, it looked like paradise, a temporary haven from the horrors outside. "Okay," I muttered, pushing myself away from the door. Barricade first, then search for supplies. I moved around the small space, dragging what furniture I could find in front of the door and windows. It wouldn't stop the creatures for long if they found me, but it might buy me some time. Once I was satisfied with my makeshift fortifications, I began to explore the cabin more thoroughly. It appeared to be an old hunter's retreat, long abandoned but still stocked with basic supplies. In a cupboard, I found some canned food and bottles of water. My stomach growled at the sight, reminding me how long it had been since I'd eaten. But food would have to wait. Survival came first. I continued my search, my excitement growing as I uncovered more useful items. A first aid kit which I immediately used to clean and bandage my wounds, a flashlight with working batteries, and best of all, a hunting rifle with a box of ammunition. "Now we're talking," I said, checking the rifle. It was old but well maintained. I loaded it carefully, the weight of the weapon reassuring in my hands. But I knew the rifle alone wouldn't be enough. These creatures were too fast, too cunning to be taken down with conventional weapons. I needed something more. My eyes fell on a collection of tools hanging on the wall. Hammers, saws, and an axe. An idea began to form in my mind. Over the next few hours I worked feverishly, crafting makeshift weapons and traps. I filled glass jars with a mixture of chemicals I found in a cleaning cupboard, creating crude but potentially effective smoke bombs. I fashioned a net from an old fishing line, coating it with the stickiest substances I could find. My hands trembled with exhaustion and nervous energy as I worked, but I pushed through. Each new contraption gave me a small boost of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I stood a chance. As I put the finishing touches on my last trap, a sound from outside made me freeze. A low guttural growl, followed by the scrape of claws on wood. "It found me," I whispered, my heart racing. I moved to the window, peering out cautiously. At first, I saw nothing but the dark forest. Then a shimmer in the air caught my eye, a distortion moving slowly around the perimeter of the cabin. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. This was it, the final confrontation. Either I would defeat this creature or I would die trying. "All right, you bastard," I muttered, hefting the rifle. "Let's end this." I moved to the door, my hand hovering over the makeshift barricade. The creature was still circling, testing for weaknesses. I knew I couldn't stay in here forever. Eventually, it would find a way in. My only chance was to take the fight to it, on my terms. With a deep breath, I began to dismantle the barricade. The noise seemed impossibly loud in the quiet cabin, and I winced with each scrape and thud. Just as I removed the last chair, a massive impact shook the door. The creature had heard me and was trying to break in. Now or never, I said to myself, gripping the doorknob. In one fluid motion, I yanked the door open and dove to the side. A blur of motion rushed past me. The creature, caught off guard by the sudden opening, had lunged inside. I scrambled to my feet, bringing the rifle up, but the creature was already gone, its camouflage rendering it nearly invisible in the dim interior of the cabin. "Come on," I called out, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "I know you're in here, let's finish this." A growl from behind me was my only warning. I spun, firing blindly. The report of the rifle was deafening in the confined space. I caught a glimpse of the creature as my shot grazed it, its camouflage flickering for a moment. It lunged at me, claws extended. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as it barely missed me. Rolling to my feet, I grabbed one of my homemade smoke bombs and hurled it at the creature. The jar shattered, releasing a cloud of noxious smoke. The creature roared in pain and confusion, its outline becoming more visible as it thrashed about. I didn't waste the opportunity. I fired again and again, each shot guided by the creature's increasingly visible form. It howled in pain and fury, its camouflage completely failing as it writhed on the floor. For a moment I thought it was over, but then, with a speed that seemed impossible for its injured state, the creature leaped at me. We went down in a tangle of limbs, the rifle skittering away across the floor. Hot breath washed over my face as the creature pinned me down, its jaws snapping inches from my throat. I reached blindly, my hand closing around the handle of the axe I'd left leaning against the wall. With a yell of desperation and fury, I swung the axe. There was a sickening thud, and suddenly, the weight on top of me was gone. I scrambled away, grabbing the rifle and bringing it to bear. But it wasn't necessary. The creature lay motionless on the floor, the axe buried deep in its skull. As the adrenaline faded, I slumped against the wall, my whole body shaking. It was over. I had survived. But as I sat there, staring at the creature's body, I knew this was just the beginning. There was still one more out there, and beyond that, the people responsible for creating these abominations in the first place. I pushed myself to my feet, wincing at the fresh bruises and cuts from the fight. There would be time to rest later. For now, I had work to do. I gathered what supplies I could from the cabin, including my remaining homemade weapons. As I stepped out into the forest, the first light of dawn was breaking through the trees. A new day was beginning, and with it, a new chapter in this terrifying adventure. I had survived the night, discovered the creature's weaknesses, and proven to myself that I could fight back. Now, it was time to find the others, if they were still alive, and put an end to this nightmare once and for all. With a deep breath, I set off into the forest, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The forest was eerily quiet as I made my way back towards the abandoned military facility. My makeshift weapons clinked softly against each other, a constant reminder of the confrontation to come. I knew the last creature would be there, drawn to the familiar environment, and possibly seeking revenge for its fallen companions. As the dilapidated building came into view, I paused, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. "This is it," I muttered to myself. No turning back now. I approached cautiously, my senses on high alert for any sign of movement. The front door hung askew on its hinges, creaking softly in the breeze. Perfect. With practiced movements, I set up my trap. A tripwire connected to several paint-filled balloons positioned just inside the doorway. It wasn't much, but it might give me the edge I needed. Then, I waited. Hours passed, the sun climbing high in the sky before beginning its slow descent. Just as I was beginning to wonder if I'd miscalculated, I heard it. The soft scrape of claws on concrete, coming from inside the building. My heart raced as I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, clutching my homemade net in one hand and a smoke bomb in the other. The sound grew closer, a low growl accompanying the footsteps. Suddenly, the tripwire twanged. There was a startled roar, followed by the satisfying splat of bursting paint balloons. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself through the doorway, hurling the smoke bomb as I went. The creature was there, its outline clearly visible thanks to the paint covering most of its body. It thrashed in confusion, momentarily blinded by the smoke. "Now!" I yelled, more to pump myself up than anything else. I flung the net, watching with satisfaction as it entangled the beast. But my victory was short-lived. With a roar of fury, the creature tore through the net as if it were made of paper. It turned to face me, its eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. "Oh shit," I breathed, barely diving out of the way as it lunged at me. I rolled to my feet, grabbing a broken pipe from the debris-strewn floor. The creature charged again, and this time I stood my ground, swinging the pipe with all my might. There was a satisfying crunch as the pipe connected with the creature's head, but it barely seemed to faze it. A clawed hand shot out, catching me across the chest. I cried out in pain as I felt the claws tear into my flesh, warm blood immediately soaking my shirt. "Is that all you've got?" I taunted through gritted teeth, trying to ignore the searing pain. The creature snarled, circling me warily now. I could see its camouflage trying to reassert itself, the paint-covered areas flickering and shifting. That's when I noticed it, a patch on the creature's shoulder where the camouflage seemed weaker, almost transparent, a weakness in its armor. I feinted to the left, then quickly changed direction, driving the pipe towards that spot with every ounce of strength I had left. The creature howled in agony as the pipe struck home, sinking deep into its flesh. But I had left myself open. The creature's other arm whipped around, catching me in the ribs and sending me flying across the room. I hit the wall hard, stars exploding in my vision. "Come on," I wheezed, struggling to my feet. "I'm not done yet." The creature approached slowly, clearly wary now. It had underestimated me before, and it wasn't going to make the same mistake again. My eyes darted around the room looking for anything I could use. They landed on a heavy chain hanging from a partially collapsed ceiling beam. An idea formed in my mind. Crazy, desperate, but it was all I had. I backed up slowly, positioning myself under the chain. The creature followed, its eyes never leaving me. "That's it," I muttered. "Come to Papa." Just as the creature tensed to spring, I reached up and yanked on the chain with all my might. The beam groaned, then gave way with a thunderous crash. The creature looked up, momentarily distracted. It was all the opening I needed. I launched myself forward, tackling the beast around its midsection. We went down in a tangle of limbs rolling across the floor. Claws raked across my back, but I held on, grappling for control. Somehow, I managed to wrap the chain around one of the creature's arms. It roared in fury, thrashing wildly, but I clung on, wrapping more of the chain around its thrashing form. "Stay down," I grunted, using my full body weight to pin the creature as I secured the last loop of chain. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the creature's struggles began to weaken. Whether from exhaustion or the realization that it was truly trapped, I couldn't tell. I rolled off, panting heavily, every inch of my body screaming in pain. But I had done it. The creature lay bound before me, its camouflage fully failed, revealing its true, horrifying form. "Not so tough now, are you?" I gasped, allowing myself a moment of triumph. The creature growled lowly, its eyes fixed on me with a mixture of hatred and something else. Fear? Resignation? As my breathing slowed and the adrenaline began to fade, I found myself really looking at the creature for the first time. Despite its monstrous appearance, I could see the vestiges of humanity in its eyes, in the way it held itself. "You were human once," I said softly, more to myself than to the creature. "What did they do to you?" To my shock, the creature responded. Its voice was guttural, barely comprehensible, but the words were unmistakable. "Pain. So much pain." I froze, staring at the bound monster in disbelief. You can talk?" The creature's form shimmered, its camouflage attempting to activate but failing due to its restrained state. "Was human. Then pain changed." My mind raced. This wasn't just some mindless beast, it was a victim, transformed against its will into the monster before me. "I'm sorry," I said, surprising myself with the sincerity in my voice. "I didn't know. I thought you were just trying to kill us." "Instinct," the creature growled. "Can't control. Hungry. Angry." I nodded slowly, beginning to understand. The experiments hadn't just changed these beings physically. They had altered their minds, their very nature. "Listen," I said, crouching down near the creature but still keeping a safe distance. "I want to help you. There might be a way to reverse this, or at least to control it. But you have to trust me." The creature regarded me silently for a long moment, then slowly it nodded. "Okay," I breathed, hardly believing what I was about to do. "I'm going to loosen these chains a bit, but you have to promise not to attack me. Can you do that?" Another nod, more emphatic this time. With trembling hands, I began to loosen the chains, ready to jump back at the slightest sign of aggression. But the creature remained still, watching me with those eerily intelligent eyes. As the last chain fell away, the creature slowly rose to its feet. I tensed, prepared for an attack, but it simply stood there, its form shimmering as its camouflage slowly reasserted itself. "Thank you," it growled. I nodded, still hardly able to believe what was happening. "We need to find the others, my friends and any other people like you. Then we can expose the truth about what happened here and find a way to help you." The creature tilted its head, considering. Then, to my amazement, it extended a clawed hand towards me. I hesitated for just a moment before reaching out and grasping it. The creature's skin was cool and strange to the touch, but the gesture was undeniably human. As we stood there, human and monster united in an unlikely alliance, I realized that the tables had truly turned. What had started as a fight for survival had become something much more, a quest for truth, justice, and redemption. "Let's go," I said, releasing the creature's hand and moving towards the door. "We've got work to do." As we stepped out into the fading daylight, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we had a real chance. The hunter had become the ally, and together, we would unravel the dark secrets that had led to this moment. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, human and monster, united against a common enemy. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly before us as we made our way through the dense underbrush. Every step was a struggle, not just because of my own injuries, but also due to the creature's reluctance to move quickly. Its camouflage flickered on and off, as if it were fighting an internal battle between its human consciousness and its altered instincts. "Come on," I urged, tugging gently on the makeshift leash I'd fashioned from some of the leftover chains. "We need to keep moving." The creature growled softly but complied, its massive form lumbering forward. I couldn't help but marvel at the dichotomy of its existence, a being of immense power and predatory instinct, now following me like an overgrown, deadly puppy. As we walked, I found myself talking to it, partly to fill the eerie silence of the forest, and partly in hopes of nurturing whatever humanity remained within it. "I wonder what your name was," I mused aloud. "Before all this happened to you. Do you remember?" The creature's step faltered for a moment, its form shimmering as it turned its head towards me. "Mike," it growled, the word barely recognizable. I nearly tripped over a root in shock. "Mike, you remember your name?" A low rumble emanated from the creature, what might have been a sigh in a human. Sometimes remember, then forget again. My heart ached at the pain and confusion evident in its voice. "We'll figure this out, Mike," I promised. "We'll find a way to help you." As we continued our journey, I found myself constantly scanning our surroundings, not just for potential threats, but for any sign of my missing companions. The thought of them out there, possibly injured or worse, gnawed at me relentlessly. It was nearing dusk when I heard it, a faint call in the distance. I froze, straining my ears. "Hello? Is anyone out there?" My heart leapt. I knew that voice. "Sarah!" I shouted back, my voice echoing through the trees. "Sarah, we're over here!" I heard a commotion, the sound of people rushing through the underbrush. Then suddenly, they were there. Sarah, Tom, and Lisa, bursting into the small clearing where we stood. Their faces were a mixture of relief and shock as they took in the scene before them. Me, battered and bloodied, standing next to the chained creature. "Oh my God," Lisa breathed, her eyes wide with fear. What is that thing?" I held up my hands in a calming gesture. "It's okay," I said quickly. "He's not going to hurt us. This is Mike." "Mike?" Tom repeated incredulously. "What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath, knowing how insane I was about to sound. "It's a long story, but this creature, it used to be human. They all did. They were transformed by some kind of experiment." Sarah stepped forward cautiously, her eyes never leaving the creature. "And you're saying this one is friendly?" "Not exactly friendly," I admitted. "But he's not trying to kill us anymore. He can understand us, even talk a little. I think he wants our help." As if to confirm my words, the creature, Mike, let out a low whine, his form shimmering as he tried to make himself appear less threatening. My companions exchanged incredulous looks, but the immediate fear in their eyes began to fade. "What happened to you?" Tom asked, finally tearing his gaze away from Mike to look at me. We feared the worst. I gave them a quick rundown of everything that had transpired since we were separated. My encounter with the creature in the cabin, the final confrontation at the facility, and the unexpected turn of events that led to this unlikely alliance. As I spoke, we began to walk, all of us eager to put as much distance between ourselves and the horrors of the past few days as possible. Mike lumbered along beside us, occasionally letting out low growls that seemed to be his attempts at joining the conversation. "So what do we do now?" Lisa asked as we trudged through the deepening twilight. "We can't exactly walk into town with him." She gestured towards Mike. I sighed, running a hand through my matted hair. "I've been thinking about that. We need to expose what happened here, but we also need to protect Mike and any others like him. They're victims in all this, not monsters." "Are you suggesting we keep this a secret?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed. "From the authorities?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me says we should turn everything over to the proper authorities, let them handle it. But another part is afraid they might just continue the experiments." Tom finished for me, nodding grimly. We walked in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. The weight of the decision before us was palpable. On one hand, we had a responsibility to report what had happened, to ensure that those responsible were brought to justice. On the other, we had made a promise to Mike to help him. And who knew how many others like him might be out there, in need of protection rather than persecution. As we debated back and forth, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig seemed to carry an ominous undertone. I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia, the lingering effects of our ordeal, but the feeling persisted. It was Lisa who finally gave voice to my unease. "Guys," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think we're being followed." We all stopped, instinctively drawing closer together. Mike let out a low growl, his form shimmering as he scanned the surrounding forest. "There," Tom hissed, pointing to a shadow that seemed to move independently of the trees. My blood ran cold as I realized what we were seeing. It wasn't just one shadow, but several, flitting between the trees with an unnatural grace. "More of them?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I shook my head slowly. "I don't think so. These moved differently, more human. As if in response to my words, one of the shadows detached itself from the trees, stepping into a shaft of fading sunlight. It was a man, dressed all in black, his face obscured by a mask and goggles. "Well, well," the man said, his voice muffled but carrying a note of smug satisfaction. "What an interesting group we have here." More figures emerged from the shadows surrounding us. I counted at least 6, all armed and wearing the same nondescript black uniforms. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "What do you want?" The man who had spoken first, clearly the leader, tilted his head slightly. "We're just here to clean up a little mess. It seems some of our test subjects have gotten a bit out of hand." My stomach dropped as the implications of his words sank in. These weren't government agents or police. These were the people responsible for creating the creatures in the first place. Mike let out a furious roar, lunging forward. I barely managed to hold him back with the chain. "Easy, big guy," I murmured. "Not yet." The leader chuckled, the sound chilling in its casualness. "Oh, how interesting. You've managed to form a bond with it. That could prove quite useful in our future experiments." "Future experiments?" Lisa echoed, her voice rising in panic. "You can't be serious. After everything that's happened?" "My dear," the man said, his tone patronizing, "what's happened here is merely a setback. With the data we've gathered, our next attempts will be far more successful." I felt a surge of anger course through me. These people, with their cold calculations and disregard for human life, were the real monsters here. "You're not taking him," I growled, stepping protectively in front of Mike. "And you're not continuing your sick experiments. It's over." The leader sighed, as if disappointed by a child's naivety. "I'm afraid you don't have a choice in the matter. You've seen too much, know too much. But don't worry, you'll all be making valuable contributions to science." As the armed men began to close in around us, I exchanged a look with my companions. In that moment, an unspoken agreement passed between us. We had come too far, survived too much to give up now. I leaned close to Mike, whispering urgently, "When I say now, I want you to roar, as loud as you can, okay?" Mike growled softly in acknowledgement. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Then, just as the first man reached for us, I shouted, "Now!" Mike's roar shook the very air around us, a primal sound of fury and defiance. In the moment of shock and confusion that followed, we made our move. I yanked Mike's chain, using his momentum to bowl over 2 of the men. Sarah and Tom each tackled another, while Lisa grabbed a fallen branch, swinging it wildly at anyone who came close. The forest erupted into chaos, shouts and growls mixing with the sounds of struggle. I lost track of who was where in the melee, focusing only on staying on my feet and keeping Mike from tearing anyone apart. Somehow, in the confusion, we managed to break free of the circle of attackers. "Run!" I yelled, not caring who heard me. We plunged into the darkening forest, branches whipping at our faces as we fled. Behind us, I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. But we didn't slow down. As we ran, dodging trees and leaping over fallen logs, I realized that our situation had changed yet again. We were no longer just survivors trying to escape a nightmare. We had become something more. Witnesses to a terrible truth. Protectors of a being that by all rights shouldn't exist. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and difficult choices. But as I ran through the forest, my unlikely companions by my side, I felt a fierce determination take hold. We would find a way through this. We would expose the truth, protect Mike and any others like him, and ensure that the horrors we had witnessed would never be repeated. The long walk was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like we might just have a chance to see it through to the end. The dense forest gave way to a clearing, and with it, our fleeting hope of escape evaporated. We stumbled to a halt, gasping for breath, as a circle of blinding spotlights suddenly illuminated us from all sides. The unmistakable sound of weapons being cocked echoed through the night air. "Hands where we can see them," a voice boomed through a megaphone. "Do not move." I slowly raised my hands, my heart pounding in my chest. Around me, I could see Sarah, Tom, and Lisa doing the same, their faces a mixture of fear and resignation. Mike, the creature, let out a low growl but remained still, perhaps sensing the gravity of our situation. "It's over," I whispered, more to myself than to the others. "We can't outrun them." As my eyes adjusted to the harsh light, I could make out the outlines of heavily armed military personnel surrounding us. Their uniforms bore no insignia, no identifying marks. Whoever they weren't standard military. A figure stepped forward, his face obscured by the backlighting. "You've led us on quite a chase," he said, his voice calm but laced with authority. "But it ends here. You'll be coming with us now." Before we could respond, several soldiers moved in, quickly restraining us with zip ties. I winced as they tightened mine, the plastic cutting into my already battered wrists. "Wait," I called out as they approached Mike. "He's not dangerous. Please, don't hurt him." The figure who had spoken paused, tilting his head curiously. "Interesting," he mused. "You seem to have formed a bond with the subject. That's unexpected." I opened my mouth to argue further, but a sharp jab in my back silenced me. We were roughly herded towards a group of waiting vehicles, large, unmarked black vans that seemed to materialize out of the darkness. As they loaded us into separate vans, I caught a final glimpse of Mike being corralled into what looked like a reinforced transport container. The creature's eyes met mine for a brief moment, and I saw something there that broke my heart. Fear, confusion, and a silent plea for help. The doors slammed shut, plunging us into darkness. I felt the van lurch into motion, carrying us away from the forest and towards an unknown destination. Hours seemed to pass in that dark, cramped space. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Who were these people? Where were they taking us? And what would become of Mike? Finally, the van came to a stop. The doors opened, revealing a vast underground parking structure. We were hustled out and led through a maze of sterile white corridors, eventually being separated into individual interrogation rooms. The room they put me in was small and bare, containing only a metal table and 2 chairs. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the harsh fluorescent lights and oppressive silence wearing on my already frayed nerves. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the door opened. A man in a crisp military uniform entered, his chest adorned with an impressive array of medals. He sat across from me, his steely gaze boring into mine. "I am General Hawthorne," he said without preamble. "And you, young man, have stumbled into something far bigger than you could possibly imagine." I leaned forward, my restraints clinking against the table. "Where are my friends? And what have you done with Mike?" The general raised an eyebrow. "Mike? You mean the creature. Rest assured it's being well taken care of. As for your friends, they're safe. Their cooperation will determine how long they remain that way." A chill ran down my spine at the thinly veiled threat. "What do you want from us?" "Information," Hawthorne replied simply. "We need to know everything that happened in that forest. Every detail, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant." For the next several hours, I recounted our harrowing experience. The general listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification but otherwise remaining impassive. As I finished my tale, Hawthorne leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You've been through quite an ordeal," he said, his tone almost sympathetic. "But I'm afraid your involvement in this matter is far from over." "What do you mean?" I asked, a sense of dread settling in my stomach. The general's eyes met mine, and in them, I saw a coldness that sent shivers down my spine. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, the consequences will be severe." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. The creatures you encountered were not the result of a failed experiment. They were a success, the culmination of decades of research into human enhancement and adaptive camouflage technology. My mind reeled at his words. But the destruction, the lives lost, how could that be considered a success? Hawthorne waved his hand dismissively. Collateral damage. Unfortunate, but necessary in the pursuit of progress. What you witnessed was merely the field testing phase of Project Chameleon. Field testing? I echoed, my voice rising in disbelief. You mean you deliberately set those things loose? Not just set loose, the general corrected. We created a controlled environment to test their capabilities. The abandoned military facility, the forest preserve, all of it was constructed for this purpose. A horrifying realization dawned on me. And we were, what? Lab rats? Hawthorne's lips curled into a cold smile. Test subjects, if you prefer. We needed to observe how the enhanced beings would interact with ordinary humans in a survival situation. Your group's resilience was impressive. My blood boiled as the full implications of his words sank in. All the terror, the pain, the losses we had suffered, it had all been orchestrated. We had been unknowing pawns in their twisted game. You're monsters, I spat, my hands clenching into fists beneath the table. The general's expression hardened. We're visionaries, he corrected. The technology we've developed will revolutionize warfare, espionage, even civilian applications. Imagine soldiers who can blend perfectly with any environment, spies who can infiltrate the most secure facilities undetected. At what cost, I demanded. How many more people will die for your vision? Hawthorne leaned forward, his voice low and intense. That's where you and your friends come in. Your experience, your bond with the subject you call Mike, it's invaluable data. With your help, we can refine the process, minimize the undesirable side effects. I stared at him in disbelief. You think we'd help you after everything you've done? The general's smile returned, cold and calculating. I don't think you understand your situation. You don't have a choice. You're already part of this, whether you like it or not. The only question is whether you'll cooperate willingly, or if we'll have to use other methods of persuasion. The threat hung in the air between us. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I needed to buy time to find a way out of this nightmare. I need to think about it, I said finally. And I need to see my friends, make sure they're okay. Hawthorne nodded, seemingly satisfied. Of course, you'll be given time to consider your position. But don't take too long. We're on a tight schedule, and decisions will be made with or without your input. He stood, moving towards the door. Just before exiting, he turned back to me. Oh, and don't get any ideas about trying to expose this. Even if you manage to escape, which you won't, no one would believe you. We have ways of making inconvenient truths disappear. With that ominous warning, he left, the door locking behind him with a final sounding click. I slumped in my chair, the weight of everything I'd learned pressing down on me. How could we possibly fight against something this big, this powerful? Hours later, I was escorted to a small utilitarian dormitory where I found Sarah, Tom, and Lisa waiting. The relief at seeing them safe was overwhelming, but short-lived as I saw the haunted looks in their eyes. They told you everything? I asked quietly. Sarah nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. It's insane. All of it. How could they do this? We can't let them get away with it, Tom said firmly, his fists clenched at his sides. Lisa looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. But what can we do? We're trapped here, and even if we weren't, who would believe us? I took a deep breath, looking each of them in the eye. I don't know, I admitted. But we have to try. We owe it to ourselves, to Mike, and to everyone who didn't make it out of that forest. A moment of silent understanding passed between us. Without words, we all agreed. We would find a way to expose the truth, no matter the cost. As we sat there, huddled together in that sterile room, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. We had survived the horrors of the forest, outsmarted creatures that shouldn't exist. Somehow we would find a way to outsmart these men who played with lives as if they were pawns on a chessboard. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across our faces as we huddled in the corner of our shared dormitory. It had been 3 days since our confrontation with General Hawthorne, 3 days of feigned cooperation and careful observation. Now, it was time to act. "Everyone clear on the plan?" I whispered, my eyes darting to the camera in the corner of the room. We had discovered its blind spot on the first day, a sliver of space where we could talk without being overheard. Sarah nodded, her face set with determination. "I'll handle the security systems. 4 years of computer science better be good for something. Tom and I will secure our exit route," Lisa added, her voice barely audible, "and create a diversion if needed." Tom cracked his knuckles, a grim smile on his face. "I've always wanted to start a riot." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "And I'll get the files. Remember, we'll only have a few minutes once the alarms are triggered. Whatever happens, we meet at the rendezvous point. No one gets left behind." We shared a final look, years of trust and shared trauma condensed into a single moment. Then, with a nod, we dispersed to our assigned tasks. I made my way to the research wing, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. The keycard we had painstakingly cloned over the past days felt heavy in my pocket, a small piece of plastic that held our fate in its magnetic strip. As I approached the main terminal, I saw my opportunity. Dr. Reeves, the lead scientist we had identified, was just leaving his station. I quickened my pace, timing my arrival perfectly. "Dr. Reeves," I called out, affecting a tone of urgency. "General Hawthorne sent me. He needs you in Lab 3 immediately. Something about unexpected developments with Subject M." Reeves's eyes widened. "Mike, what's happened?" I shook my head, playing my part. "I don't know the details, sir. He just said it was urgent." Without another word, Reeves hurried off, leaving his terminal unlocked. I slid into his chair, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Years of late-night gaming sessions had honed my typing speed, and now, with adrenaline coursing through my veins, I moved faster than ever. File after file flashed across the screen as I downloaded everything I could find. Project reports, test results, video logs, anything that could expose the true nature of Project Chameleon. Suddenly, a message popped up on the screen. "Security breach detected in Sector 7. All personnel report to designated safe zones." My heart leapt. That was Sarah's signal. She had successfully breached the security systems, triggering a false alarm to create confusion, but it also meant our time was running out. I yanked the flash drive from the computer just as the first real alarms began to blare. Red lights flashed, bathing the corridor in a crimson glow as I sprinted towards our meeting point. "Stop right there," a voice shouted behind me. I risked a glance back to see 2 guards in pursuit, their weapons drawn. Rounding a corner, I nearly collided with Tom and Lisa. "Run!" I gasped, and together we pelted down the hallway. "This way," Lisa called, veering left into what looked like a dead end. But as we reached the wall, she pressed a hidden panel, revealing a maintenance tunnel. "I memorized the blueprints," she explained as we squeezed through the opening. The tunnel was narrow and dark, forcing us to move in single file. Behind us, I could hear the shouts of our pursuers growing fainter. "Where's Sarah?" Tom asked, his voice echoing in the confined space. As if in answer, a figure materialized out of the darkness ahead of us. I nearly cried out in shock before realizing it was Sarah, her form shimmering as she deactivated some kind of cloaking device. "Borrowed a prototype," she said with a grim smile, holding up what looked like a wristwatch. "Thought it might come in handy." We emerged from the tunnel into a vast underground garage, rows of military vehicles stretching out before us. "There," Tom pointed, indicating a nondescript van near the exit. As we sprinted towards it, a spotlight suddenly illuminated us. "Freeze!" A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "You are surrounded. Surrender immediately." My mind raced, searching for a way out. Then I remembered Mike. In all the chaos, I had almost forgotten about him. "Sarah," I hissed, "can that device cloak all of us?" She shook her head. "Not for long. Maybe a minute, tops. It'll have to do. Everyone, huddle close." As Sarah activated the device, I raised my voice. "General Hawthorne, we know you can hear us. We're not surrendering, and if you try to stop us, we'll release everything we know to the public. But we're willing to make a deal." There was a tense pause, then Hawthorne's voice came over the speaker. "What kind of deal?" "Release Mike, Subject M. Let him come with us. In return, we'll keep your secret. For now. You'll have time to shut down the project, minimize the damage. It's your best option." Another pause. Longer this time. I held my breath, acutely aware of the seconds ticking away on Sarah's device. Finally, Hawthorne's voice returned. "Very well. But know this. If one word of this gets out, we will find you. And what happens next will make your experience in the forest seem like a pleasant dream." A door at the far end of the garage opened and Mike lumbered out, his massive form instantly recognizable. Without hesitation, he made his way towards us, guided by some sixth sense. "Okay," I whispered. "Tom, you drive. Everyone else in the back with Mike. Go." We piled into the van just as Sarah's cloaking device flickered out. Tom gunned the engine, tires squealing as we raced towards the exit. For one heart-stopping moment, I thought the gate wouldn't open. Then, with agonizing slowness, it began to rise. We shot out into the night, the cool air whipping through the open windows, a sharp contrast to the sterile environment we'd left behind. In the back, Mike let out a low rumble that might have been relief. For several minutes, no one spoke. We were all too focused on watching for signs of pursuit, too overwhelmed by the reality of what we'd just done. Finally, as the facility disappeared behind us, and the first hints of dawn began to color the sky, Sarah broke the silence. "We did it," she said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration. "We actually did it." A wave of emotion washed over me. Relief, fear, triumph, and a dozen other feelings I couldn't name. "Yeah," I managed, my voice hoarse. "But this is just the beginning." Lisa leaned forward from the back. "What do you mean? We got out. We have the files. It's over, isn't it?" I shook my head, my mind already racing ahead to the challenges that awaited us. "No, it's not over. We're fugitives now. And we have a story to tell. A story that could change everything. But we have to be smart about how we do it." Tom spoke up from the driver's seat. "He's right. If we just go public with everything, we'll be discredited, maybe even eliminated. We need a plan." "First things first," I said, trying to organize my thoughts. "We need to find a safe place to lay low, somewhere we can go through all this data and figure out our next move." Sarah nodded. "I know a place. My uncle has a cabin in the mountains. It's isolated, off the grid. We should be safe there, at least for a while." As we drove into the rising sun, a strange calm settled over me. We were on the run, carrying secrets that could topple governments and change the course of history. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger. But looking around at my friends, at Mike's hulking form in the back of the van, I felt a surge of determination. We had survived the forest, we had escaped a top-secret military facility. Whatever came next, we would face it together. And we would make sure the truth was heard no matter the cost. The van sped down the empty highway, carrying us towards an uncertain future. But for the first time in what felt like ages, I allowed myself to feel a glimmer of hope. We had taken the first step. The small cafe bustled with activity, the chatter of patrons and the clinking of cups providing a perfect cover for our clandestine meeting. I nervously drummed my fingers on the table, my eyes constantly scanning the room for any sign of trouble. Across from me, Sarah and Tom sat rigid with tension, while Lisa kept watch near the window. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah whispered, her voice tight with concern. If we're wrong about her, I nodded, trying to project more confidence than I felt. She's our best shot. Her reputation for exposing government cover-ups is unmatched. If anyone can help us get the truth out there, it's her. As if on cue, the bell above the door chimed and a woman entered. She was shorter than I expected, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the room in seconds. This was Vanessa Reeves, the journalist we had spent weeks vetting and contacting through secure channels. She slid into the booth next to me, her movements casual but her posture alert. "So," she said without preamble, "you're the ones claiming to have evidence of a secret government super soldier program involving invisible monsters. You realize how insane that sounds, right?" I took a deep breath, meeting her skeptical gaze. "We know how it sounds, but we've lived it. And we have proof." For the next hour, we laid out our story. The forest, the facility, our capture and escape. We spared no detail. Vanessa listened intently, her expression neutral, occasionally jotting down notes in a small notebook. As we finished, she leaned back, her eyes narrowed. "It's one hell of a story, but stories aren't enough. You mentioned proof?" With trembling hands, I pulled out a laptop and a flash drive. "Everything's here. Research documents, test results, video logs, and..." I paused, glancing at my companions before continuing. "Footage of the creatures themselves." Vanessa's eyebrows shot up at that. "Show me." I inserted the drive and pulled up a video file. It was footage from the forest, captured by one of the facility's hidden cameras. The image showed a clearing, seemingly empty. Then suddenly a shimmer in the air like heat haze. As we watched, the shimmer coalesced into a vaguely humanoid shape before disappearing again. "My God," Vanessa breathed, her skepticism visibly crumbling. I've never seen anything like it." "There's more," Tom said, leaning forward. "Financial records showing black budget allocations, correspondence between military officials discussing the project. It's all there." Vanessa's eyes gleamed with the excitement of a journalist onto a massive story. "This could bring down governments. You understand the risks of going public with this, don't you? There are people who would kill to keep this quiet." Lisa spoke up, her voice steady. "We know the risks, but the world needs to know the truth. What they did to us, to Mike, to countless others. It can't be allowed to continue." For a moment, Vanessa was silent, her gaze moving from one of us to the other. Then she nodded, a look of determination settling over her features. "All right, I'm in. But we do this my way. We need to be smart about how we release this information. One wrong move, and we'll all disappear faster than those creatures of yours." Over the next few weeks, we worked tirelessly with Vanessa, combing through the mountain of data we had stolen. We corroborated facts, tracked down additional sources, and prepared for the storm we knew was coming. Finally, the day arrived. I sat in Vanessa's office, watching on multiple screens as our story broke across every major news network simultaneously. Breaking news. A CNN anchor announced, her voice tense with excitement. Shocking revelations of a secret government program involving genetically modified invisible soldiers have surfaced. Whistleblowers claim to have evidence of unethical experiments and cover-ups reaching the highest levels of military command. On another screen, footage from the forest played, showing glimpses of the creatures in action. Social media exploded with reactions, the story spreading like wildfire. "It's working," Sarah breathed, her eyes wide as she monitored the online response. "People are believing it." I nodded, a mix of relief and anxiety churning in my stomach. This is just the beginning. They'll try to discredit us, to bury the truth. We need to be ready. As predicted, the backlash was swift and severe. Government officials denounced the story as a hoax. Conspiracy theorists latched onto it with frenzied enthusiasm, and we found ourselves at the center of a global firestorm. But we had prepared for this. Each attempt at denial was met with more evidence. Every accusation of fraud was countered with irrefutable proof. Slowly but surely, the tide of public opinion began to turn. 3 months after our initial revelation, we received a summons we had been both expecting and dreading. We were called to testify before a special congressional committee tasked with investigating our claims. The hearing room was packed as we took our seats. Cameras flashed, and I could feel the weight of the world's attention pressing down on us. General Hawthorne sat at another table, his face a mask of stone. Senator Eleanor Harding, the committee chair, called the session to order. We are here today to investigate claims of a covert military program known as Project Chameleon. Will the whistleblowers please state your names for the record? One by one, we introduced ourselves. When it was my turn, I leaned into the microphone, my voice steadier than I felt. My name is Alex Turner. I am here to tell the truth about what happened to us, and to ensure that those responsible are held accountable. For hours, we testified. We recounted our experiences, presented our evidence, and answered a barrage of questions from both sympathetic and hostile committee members. As the session neared its end, Senator Harding turned to General Hawthorne. General, in light of the overwhelming evidence presented here today, do you have any statement to make? Hawthorne's jaw clenched, his eyes boring into mine with undisguised hatred. For a moment, I thought he would continue to deny everything. Then, to my shock, he slumped in his seat. Project Chameleon was initiated with the noblest of intentions, he began, his voice weary. To create soldiers who could infiltrate enemy territory without detection, to save American lives, but I lost sight of the human cost. In our pursuit of progress, we committed unforgivable acts. A hush fell over the room as the implications of his admission sank in. It was over. The truth was out. In the days that followed, the fallout was immense. High-ranking military officials were arrested, government agencies were overhauled, and a global debate on the ethics of human enhancement raged. As for us, we were hailed as heroes by some, vilified as traitors by others. But none of that mattered. We had done what we set out to do. The truth had been revealed. 1 week after the hearing, we gathered at Sarah's uncle's cabin, the place that had been our sanctuary during those tumultuous months. Mike was there too, his massive form a reminder of all we had been through. As we sat around the fire, a comfortable silence fell over us. Finally, Tom spoke up. So, what now? Back to normal life? I shook my head, gazing into the flames. I don't think there is a normal life for us anymore. Not after everything we've seen, everything we know. Lisa nodded in agreement. We've opened Pandora's box. Project Chameleon might be exposed, but who knows what other secrets are out there, waiting to be discovered? Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with purpose. Then we keep digging. We use what we've learned, the connections we've made. There are more truths to be uncovered, more wrongs to be righted. As I looked around at my friends, at Mike, I felt a surge of determination. We had faced the impossible and emerged stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever invisible threats lurked in the shadows, we would face them together. You're right, I said, raising my glass in a toast. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. As our glasses clinked together, I couldn't shake the feeling that our greatest adventures and our greatest challenges were still to come. The world had changed, and we had changed with it. The invisible had been made visible, but I knew in my heart that there were more secrets waiting to be brought into the light. The fire crackled, casting long shadows across our faces. Tomorrow, we would begin the next chapter of our journey. But for now, we savored this moment of victory, of friendship, of the quiet that comes after the storm. The truth had been revealed, but the quest for justice, for understanding, for a better world, that was a story without end.